6:30. So just to confirm that we're ready to start the meeting. We're ready to start the meeting. Excellent. Good evening and welcome to this meeting of the OVO Scrutiny Committee. I'm Councillor Mary Wheel, Chair of the committee. The event is being live streamed on YouTube and welcome to everybody out there who's watching, as well as to everybody in this room. Before we start the meeting, I would ask members of the committee to please make sure, and your audience, to make sure your mobiles are on silent and switched off, because we will start the meeting with 72 seconds of silence to remember those who lost their lives in the Grenfell tragedy. Thank you. Apologies have been received from Councillor Claire Simmons. Are there any other apologies? Does any member have any interest to declare? Looking at the minutes of the previous meeting, we've got 3 sets of minutes to consider. The first of those held on the 11th of November, which have been circulated. Can I assign them as a correct record? Minutes of the meeting held on the 20th of November. Can I assign those as a correct record? And the minutes of the meeting held on the 18th of December. Can I assign those as well? Thank you very much. I will do that in a minute.
Mary, could I just say one thing? Could I have just very quick assurance as such that the action points in 3 sets of meetings have been picked up by officers? Because there's quite a lot of ground covers in those meetings. I don't want to go through them now. There are a lot of actions, and just make sure they have been.
They are in the action tracker.
Right.
Yes. Thank you. So item 4 is the Maxilla review report. This follows on. This is an update on the progress of the proposals and looks at alternative options. And it follows sort of hard on the heels of the last time this report came here, and we discussed in depth, particularly around the risks and concerns. And so this is a timely update. We invited representatives from Maxilla CIC to join us at this meeting to speak to the committee, and they're sitting here at the table with us. I can put name plate. I'm going to start by inviting them to introduce themselves and speak to the committee for a maximum of 5 minutes, as we've discussed beforehand. And after that, I will ask the committee if they've got anything they want clarified, and then ask officers and the lead members to speak. So if we can start with Maxilla. PLC.
Yeah, cool. So hi everyone, good evening. I'm Bashir Hassan. I'm one of the directors of Maxilla City.
Hi, I'm Zakia Amlak. I'm a director at Maxilla City.
I'm Tayshan Hayden-Smith, and I'm a director at Maxilla City CIC.
Hey guys, I'm Akil, and I'm a consultant at Maxilla City.
Yeah, so I thought it might be good to just give a bit of context as to why we're here, and I guess the journey that's brought us into this room today. But we're all very aware that Maxilla City is a Grenfell legacy project. I think even calling it a project, I think feels quite uncomfortable for me personally. But I think as young people in the local area in North Kensington, we were thrown into the deep end in witnessing, experiencing, and having to deal with the traumas and the tragedy of losing friends, relatives, people that we came to know in our community, neighbours, faces that we were very familiar with. And I think that the Grenfell Tower fire has had a profound impact on not just our lives, but everyone that we've known. And so in the moments after Grenfell, when what was known as Kindred Studios was reclaimed for the use of community benefit, and so in the moments after Grenfell, I think I was part of quite a few movements, which was to kind of find some solace, seek ways of healing, finding ways to connect with each other, whilst we all try to figure out what happened. And in those moments, Latimer City was then born. Myself and Zakia was part of that movement. And I think in those moments, I saw people who were severely impacted and traumatized by Grenfell, but were really strong-willed in their efforts to try and bring people together, to try and find ways of creating some safe space for community. And so Latimer City really became a sanctuary for many young people, and I emphasize the word young, because especially when you're young and you witness something like Grenfell, you experience something like Grenfell, you don't understand the structures, you don't understand, all these kind of different people who are coming in, all these bodies, all these institutions. You kind of feel a bit lost in a moment like that, and we were able to find solace in one another. And like I say, I'm truly proud to know my colleagues and to have been on this journey with them through all the traumas, maybe some of those unspoken. And so through Latimer City, there was then, in the use of the space of Latimer City, which was in Bay 17 to 19, it was then, the question was then asked, what is going to be the future of Latimer City? What is the future of this space? A space that was so symbolic in post Grenfell Tower legacy. And there was something called MAGS, Magdalene Advisory Group meetings, which then established that something was to be formed as part of Grenfell legacy, that was going to empower young people, that was going to enable young people, as well as considering and acknowledging the fact that adult social care were also to make use of this space. And so a co-design process was then formed between adult social care and Maxilla City, and we were then interviewed and appointed as not directors at the time, but we were then tasked with creating something that could then be a vehicle in which we could then achieve something for wider community benefit. And so for the past 5 years, Maxilla City was formed and founded in 2020, in the midst of the pandemic. And so we've been through quite a few challenges on that journey. But one thing that has been consistent is that we've stood by each other, and actually our presence in the community, our understanding of the people in the community, especially in younger generations, I think is what really inspires us and carries us forwards. I will say that this journey has been not made any easier by the chopping and changing, the changing of goalposts of the project. And we're on kind of both sides of the fence. We're also young people from the area who have been severely impacted and traumatized by Grenfell. And I think at times, as part of this project, it's meant to come into fruition. I think the initial timeline was for a 2023 opening of Maxilla City, alongside our social care. And obviously, we're now in 2025. We've hardly a spade in the ground. And I think for me, when you think about what Grenfell legacy means, and the hope that I see in my colleagues and my friends and my community, and the efficiencies and the kind of resourcefulness and the community that I saw come together with little to no resource after Grenfell, after witnessing what happened, seeing people who have lost their children, come out and be really bold and brave and support one another and take action based on how they were feeling and based on the need. And that's something that that's been lacking within this process and within this project. And I think as young people, like I said, I didn't even know what CIC was before Grenfell. I didn't even know what half of these things were before Grenfell. Grenfell shone a light on all these different things that were happening to me, happening in and around me, and coming to learn those systems and those processes and those decision making. It really does pain me to see that we're now in 2025 sitting here with no action taken, and kind of made to feel like a bit of a nuisance and a bit of an annoyance and a bit of something that's kind of on the side. And further away we get from Grenfell, it feels like the less and less this is being discussed, thought about, prioritised, to the point where we've been made to feel quite uncomfortable about some of the language and some of the decisions that are being made based around this project. And so I really hope that we are able to sit here and share our journey so that we're able to put this back on track to benefit the younger generations, which was what it really started off as. Latimer City was very much a young people space where people were able to feel safe. They were able to be free. They were able to express themselves creatively. And even before that, when you think about how the Westway Trust was founded, 23 acres of land that was put in trust to the community, that was a reclamation of space that then formed into something that was hopeful and inspiring for younger generations. And so, I mean, like I said, we've been thrown into this.
I'll ask you to draw to a close, so near the end of your 5 minutes, or at the end of your 5 minutes. Can I start by just asking the committee if they've got any questions on that, and then move, and then just to remind you that obviously when the lead member and officers have spoken as well, there'll be a general discussion and you're welcome to ask questions then as well. So, John.
Patient Loris Segan, not with the green fingers today. Let's ask about what you envisage using the site for and the funding stream for it.
Yeah, sure. So I can speak to what we're going to use the site for, and I think maybe you can touch on the funding stream. But I think we were really, as people who were part of that initial movement and reclamation of space, which was formed as Latimer City, this was to be a space that gave agency to young people, a multi-purpose space. I mean, I can speak to the Maxilla City side of things, and obviously this was co-designed with social care, which have their own needs and their own complex needs that they need to speak to. But I think for us, it was all about kind of empowering the younger generations and post-Grenfell, really being able to give them a safe space. And so it would be a flexible kind of multi-purpose space that wasn't exclusively for young people, but there would be emphasis on young people being able to benefit from this space.
Greg?
Thanks.
Oh, sorry, you're going to talk about funding. Sorry.
Yeah, just as an add-on from that, back in 2021, we conducted quite a big exercise of a community engagement. We had an open space facilitation where we had more than 200 residents present. And from there, we commissioned a report that, from there, based on community conversations, different organizations and members of the community, we had a list of top 10 priorities as a result. And the top was spaces for young people, employment opportunities, health and well-being, so on and so forth. The idea behind our formation was that we don't then tell people what they need. It is an open dialogue with members of the community. And as an organization, we see ourselves as brokers of space. And so in terms of that direct service provision, it was predominantly around empowering and supporting organizations to kind of cohesively work together and actually giving a platform to lots of fantastic organizations in the area that need better quality services, space in order to deliver their services. So a lot of what we actually wanted to deliver, we wanted to embark on quite an in-depth process where we would have kind of like a matrix where we would determine financial sustainability, mission, how they align with different community spaces and different uses in order to decide ultimately what would happen. I think we never reached a decision between all of us. The whole idea was you wouldn't ask me and I would tell you, oh, this is what should happen in the space. It should be something that's open, transparent and decided amongst as many people in the community as possible. And in terms of the funding stream, I mean, that conversation has had lots of different iterations. So again, if you go back a number of years ago, we were given promises by King Taylor Smith around, peppercorn rent. We were given assurances around lease arrangements that site management, for example, would be done by the council, given that it's a council facility, adult social care partners are also residents in the local area. So that conversation has also had many different iterations. And we've done multiple kind of business planning exercises where we've given different forecasts based on space, and from there allocate a different ratio of space that would be given at say market level rent all the way to free space for organizations that can't afford it. And in that time, there's just been so many different iterations, given that, again, as you mentioned earlier, the goalposts kept on shifting. And so unfortunately, it's been difficult to answer that question here at a given point in time, given that things do change. And that's why we've kind of pinned that conversation quite heavily on a construction timetable to inform those answers that you seek, because we seek the same answers.
Thank you. Greg, did you want to ask something? And then,
Please. Yes, I was going to actually ask all my questions and see what you have to say about them, and then the others who are going to come to the table will also hear what I'm interested in. Have you guys had a chance to read the report that we've got in front of us? So you can see, because we uncovered this can of worms when we discovered that we had it on the agenda about 4 months ago, and that's why we're here today, to delve into it a bit more detail, because it hasn't been to a council committee. But I've got a small question and a big question. So the small question, it struck me listening to reading what's said in here about your project, is that the cafe is really important to you, but it says there isn't space for the cafe and everything else. To what extent is there room for compromise on your other activities if you wanted to prioritise the cafe against other space? Where are the trade-offs there for you as a team?
Well, we initially didn't know that the cafe space was up for admission. We found that at the same time as you guys had gone and read the report. I mean, obviously, as Tayshan said, we've been collaborating with adult social care. And, you know, we got to a point a few years ago where we thought the design was locked. So obviously, it's about having a conversation, you know, happy to move things around, but I think it's about finding the best possible outcome for both parties, and social and Maxilla City. The cafe, I mean, I don't know if any of you have actually ever been to the space, but it's a massive building. And the cafe, or the lounge as actually we call it, is really important to Maxilla City. And that's what we see holding space for events, curation, you know, inviting, you know, like mother kind of daytime things and stuff like that. So the cafe or the lounge is very important to us, but we're also happy to have those conversations if things have to be shifted slightly, or, you know, kind of, because the pillars and all of that TFL 3.5 meter, which is why the cafes, it's come up as it can be emitted, but we never had those conversations before. So this is kind of news to us as well.
Okay. So my big question, if I may, which we'll say we'll talk a bit later on, the point anyway, is this. Looking at this paper and the options in it, there's two customers. There's adult social care, which is the permanent council department that provides mandated services to our residents. And then there's you guys, a community organisation, pretty flexible. You can rent spaces out at no rent or market rent. The people come and go as time goes on. And what we've got here is what looks like at the moment a really bad deal. Like we've got 78 years from on the lease, no maintenance from TFL. That looks terrible as something to sort of put a permanent council department into, to me. But maybe you were different. Yeah. So if we didn't put adult social care in there and the council were to leave space for you, knowing that you only had it for 78 years, which does seem like quite a long time when you're talking about it in terms of our lifetimes. I won't be here in 78 years' time, but some of you might be. I mean, how do you feel about having something for 78 years and then who knows where you'd move to, or your successors would move to at that point? Would that be if we couldn't put adult social care in there because it's a bad deal, what would you feel about it? Do you think it's a good deal for you?
Yeah, I'd say it's a good deal for the community. At the end of the day, we see Maxilla City as an extension of the community. So it's not a space that we see as something belonging to us. It's like, at the end of the day, I say it brokers a space. So the big part of what we saw about these conversations about having access to the space was really just to ensure long-term viability, so organizations could, you know, project 10, 15 years in the future the type of service provision that they'd have. And we've been very open about wanting to have conversations about certain checks and balances to make sure that, if not us, that it still could have community provision. And we were very willing to have those conversations about, you know, how we can perform according to the social value requirements and making sure that we're, you know, delivering value for local residents. And so really it's underpinned by, as long as members of the community can use that space, we're more than happy to have a variety of conversations as to how that moves forward. Where we see ourselves being well placed is that we've worked directly on this project for 5 years and have a lot of different touch points around the construction, the facility, the site management, etc. And that's where we feel that we'd be well placed to, you know, have that conversation. But if, again, the primary, you know, focus of that space is just the long-term use for local residents, and that's whether that's adult social care in collaboration with Max and City. Fantastic. If not, we're more than happy to proceed. Again, fundraising independently. You know, we've been very open about working with the social investment and property team, looking at the different national grants that come about. You know, in terms of capital grant funding. Again, we've been super open as to how we can approach that conversation. It's about commitments and tangible commitments that are really, you know, seen through.
That's very helpful. Thank you. Portia, did you have your hand up just now?
Oh, yes. Well, great. Okay, I've got another question. Thank you, Mag, for coming in, and very interesting presentation and important. And I just wanted to find out, at what stage of the process did you realize that, you know, the project wasn't going according to plan? And why wasn't that brought to the council's attention for support, knowing that it was such an important project for the community, as I stated, and you know the importance of it, and also for St. Mark's Road, because that building is not fit for purpose. I mean, it's hanging on the string. So why wasn't that brought to our attention before? And at what stage did you realize that it was going according to plan during the 5 years? So for 5 years.
Who wants to respond to that one?
So there's been multiple parts through the last 5 years where things have kind of fallen apart. With we had project managers quite early on in the program, again dropped off. There's been a litany of issues, whether it's like a lack of efficiency, kind of stop and start processes. For 9 months, we were pretty much project managing on the side of things. That's going forward to invite members, you know, from the team that were associated with the project from the council. So we've been quite vocal in terms of the project teams that we try to work with, primarily which have been within social investment and property. From what we're aware about council processes, there's councillor representation on the project based on their portfolio. So that's adult social care, young people and families, and I can't remember the other, environment, parks. So that's a decision that's independent of us. If you're talking about kind of like leaning on local councillors, I remember very early on there was an attempt to do so, and for multiple reasons fell apart. And I think that's an opportunity for that relationship to be developed and worked on for sure. And I think that's conversations we're open to. But recognizing that there's been failures throughout this project, and every time that we've been very, very aware of that, and actually very vocal about the failures of the project, and really tried to spearhead it ourselves where possible. But as you said, this is a part of this project is a mandatory council function, which is adult social care, and that facility in St. Mark's Road not being fit for purpose. I grew up just down from St. Mark's Road, so I know like it's a terrible facility. So that's been on everyone's priority list. I mean, I'm not sure if anyone here from adult social care is here. I mean, they'll tell you themselves that it's been top of their agenda as well. So
Thank you, Preeti.
Thank you for coming in. I have a very quick question. You spoke about funding. So if this were to remain just Maxilla CSC, you are pretty confident that you could have other sources of funding for the maintenance of the building, the community purpose.
Combination. I think any sort of arrangement that would be made with the community, realistically speaking, it couldn't just be hand over an asset and overnight we would suddenly fundraise £5 million. I think there is a sort of a leading period, and that has always been a conversation around, as we grow as an organisation and we grow in our capacity and our delivery, that there would be that sort of arrangement where we'd be supported in different ways, whether it is financial or operational, different types of support. But we're definitely very confident about our ability to fundraise. I do fundraising outside of this as well. And H&N's an excellent fundraiser as well for growth today. So
have you fundraised anything to date?
Nothing to do with the capital project, because again, it was RBKC's remit for delivery, but we fundraised for the events major events that we've done. We fundraise independently for, but we've done numerous projects. Again, to keep ourselves busy with members of the community, we've run numerous school projects that we completely fundraised for independently, and that was a combination of different amounts. So yeah, we do have experience fundraising.
But just to extend on that, it all comes down to that lack of commitment of what it is with fundraising and the timeline. You can't approach a funder and go, this thing might happen, maybe,
Yes.
what if?
Yes.
Can pay for it. Yeah, so it's all been a lot of really strong interest and engaging partners who have shown that interest, but can't take that anywhere without knowing exactly
Shall
what that
we
looks like.
move on to listening to the officers next, and then do you want to come back, and also a particular question you want to ask?
Can I just ask one question?
Yeah.
Which was just say, which obviously we don't want this to be the case if that building couldn't be used. So there are other spaces locally that you know of or would consider. Were you happy that would be open-minded? It wasn't all Kensington.
From what we're aware of, there is nothing to suggest that it couldn't be used. So far to date, there's nothing that we've read or come across. Or at least when we sat with the TFL engineer, he did say whatever investigations would need to be done around those columns are quite non-invasive, could be done on weekends. There's work around.
Perhaps that's something we can ask officers as well when we get there about their views on that. Well, did you want to?
I'm happy to wait till later,
Okay.
as long as I can come back and ask these guys the same question.
Thank you. I just had one quick question. Thank you very much. I was obviously a bit disturbed to hear, as you said, that the goalpost kept on shifting, and you're expecting it to start in 2023, and nothing started in 2025. It's a huge delay. So it's a really quite serious question about what do you think should happen in a blue sky scenario, given what you've seen on the ground, where you get.
I think the last 5 years of our work, say 5 years, was sad to be here now and nothing's happened. But I think we have been kind of really understanding what the need in the community is. And I think what's annoying for us is that, the need and well, not annoying, it's I guess a matter of like how things evolve. Like the need changes all the time. And so the work that we do then becomes out of date every time we're then pushed back and the goalposts have then changed. And so in an ideal world, I think, like Bashir said, we aren't here to tell the community this is what we're doing and this is how we're doing it. I think we definitely want this building to respond to the need in the community and being able to broker those amazing organisations in the community who are looking for space, who are looking for safe space to be able to facilitate and enable them so that they can then, deliver that benefit to the community. I think that's for us. I think would be an ideal scenario.
Yeah, I mean, blue sky scenario, commit to that space in its entirety and its shelf life for that space to have a base for community benefit for as long as it can exist. That's the blue sky scenario. Okay.
Thank you. I think it would be helpful maybe now to move on to officers to talk about the specifics of the building. I think that's been really helpful for us to understand the vision behind the Maxilla CRC aspect of this single project. There are two aspects, this and the adult social care bit, as well as the complexities of the building. So can I ask, Sarah, are you going to comment?
I think it's Emma and I.
And any officers?
Stacey, we have a cast of thousands.
So which one is one of you going to stay at the table to Akhil or we're going to just one side of the table.
They can sit at the front of the.
Yeah, but one was going to stay at the table. We arranged an so we had a little preview. Or
One can say.
okay.
We need an extra shot.
The one who didn't do fast enough. You don't have space.
I think we'll stay with table space. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you very much. Who's going to, someone going to do a brief introduction?
I'm going to make a start. I just want to thank everybody from Maxilla for coming this evening. I think this has been, as they've said, it's been an enormous journey, very long journey. I think when the KIC was formed in 2020, we were all quite excited, or very excited, having moved on from the MAG meetings, which were not always the easiest of meetings.
I went to many.
Yes, did I. So I think then we've had COVID, and then obviously things have changed. So I think we're here today to give you an update. We know where we are is not acceptable time-wise, but things have come out of, things have appeared which we weren't aware of, and now we've got to seriously think about what we're going to do. We have a statutory service that we have to deliver. And then we have the community side, which we want to deliver, absolutely want to deliver. And I think particularly in that space because of the legacy from National City. So it's really, how do we get there? I mean, we don't have the answers today, but it's really good to assure you what we're trying to do, what we're trying to achieve, and what we want to achieve. More to the point is, we want this to work, but it may not be together now. We've realised that perhaps it was too big of a project for the group of people that we have to provide the statutory services for. And now with changes to the building, I personally can't see how that will work. But my colleagues may say differently, and we don't have that decision going at the time. So that's where I am. Do you want to add something?
Briefly, firstly, actually to thank the committee, because I think for me this has really focused through our minds having to do this report. Not to say it wasn't important, we weren't focused really about the really to make some decisions. And the TfL, when TfL came to us, that was really a game changer, which is just before we saw you. And I think both of these projects are really important and we want to get on with both of them, and that's really where I am. And I think this report does kind of suggest, doesn't make recommendations per se, but it does suggest a way forward. And it will be interesting to get the community's feedback on that. And I should say we discussed it at the leadership team last week as well.
Christine, do you want to say something as well, or? Yeah, I would just say, obviously, we would have loved to have come back and thought that we had got all of the answers to all the questions you raised last time. You did raise a lot of questions last time round. We're definitely in a work in progress with what we're trying to do. We know that the TfL issue has meant that if we were to move forward with the scheme in full, we have to make significant changes to it in the area where adult care are, which could have a knock-on effect on the area where Maxilla are. And so the suggestion around the cafe, I think, was something that we talked about in broad meetings with members about what might we move, could we move things around. We're not recommending that. I think we're just saying, actually, if you had to create space in to deliver adult care in full, which was already compromised on space, we'd have to move something up within the Maxilla space, and we would have to have that conversation. So I think we've got challenges around the risk on TfL, but we'd also, last time round, if you recall, got challenges on budget. So getting everything that we wanted to get in that building at the budget that we have got, bearing in mind what we've spent to date, was always going to be difficult. And I think that you raised some legitimate questions last time about the deliverability of that. What we haven't tried to do tonight is to point, this is where we've concluded, because we absolutely haven't. We're just, what we've done is outlined for you a number of options that we are exploring in more detail, and we're perfectly happy to explore those that relate to the Maxilla CIC in more detail with Maxilla. I think our starting point has been, from what you said last time, your questions were, is this suitable for adult care use, given the use, the user group? And there isn't anybody for adult care here, and I'm definitely not an adult care specialist. But my understanding of it is, if we were to have to, we can't design something fully fitted within 3.5 metres around each of the pillars. Can I just interrupt you there? Because I think one of the weaknesses of the paper was, in my mind, I didn't really get a clear idea of what that meant. I have no idea how many pillars there are, because clearly a 3.5 metre radius is actually, we should have put it, I worked it out with pi r squared, is actually quite a large space in which you can't have, as I understand it, permanent flooring, for example. But the paper doesn't really give an idea of how circumscribed that makes the space. So if you could just add that, and then I think that would be helpful. I think the key to it is that it does limit the space for adult care, and more importantly, moving adult care quickly, should TfL identify works that are needed, is harder because of the nature of the client group that we've got. Well, it's less hard with the other. It may be less hard because actually, I think it's what you said yourselves earlier. I think, Councillor Hammond, you asked the question, is that more flexible for you? in that space, and I think that's a conversation that we have. But I think our assumption has been we may be okay with maxilla in this space, but not necessarily with adult care, given what you said last time round. But we are absolutely open. The options that we've set out around, carry on as we are, separate adult care and set elsewhere, separate maxilla and set elsewhere, separate both elsewhere, or maxilla in this building on their own, adult care in the building on their own. I think they're obviously the options, and we haven't concluded that yet at this point in time. So this was letting you know where we've got to and the grappling that we're doing behind the scenes with it. Thank you. Okay, can I open that up to members on top? Will, then Greg.
Okay. I think I was fairly forthright in the last meeting, and I don't intend to change. I cannot see. I couldn't see how comfortable a fit it would be with maxilla and adult social care in the first place without the complexity of TfL. It was a tight fit. And if you put a big problem into a tight fit, something's got to give. So I think, my reaction to this paper is, and it's very useful to have this paper taking us a step forward. And I fully agree we don't have the answers yet. But in the context of that, one of the things that's been made clear, even clearer to me now than was in the last meeting, is there's no way that full-size relocation of adult social care forever could be, because that's what it's got to be for a statutory service, got to have sustainability over the long term. It just doesn't work. Now, the question is, therefore, as to how we move from a simplistic static analysis, which is what's been produced in this paper, the dynamic analysis, which says we are where we are now, we want to make rapid progress in the short term, and we want a proper, full solution for all parties in the longer term. So one of my first things, could the next stage of the project possibly do that dynamic analysis of steps forward into the future? I think the question, therefore, is the next question on that is, does maxilla welcome the space, maybe with other partners than adult social care, in the longer term? Because if it does, it will be the anchor party in the space there. It will continue to relate to the community, and it'll bring other community partners in as the need changes, as you expressed it, over time. You said that you have to be flexible to meet changing community needs. Adult social care needs a really solid future place. And in the paper, it mentions Kingsbridge as that. It is a strategic purchase that the council has made. And I happened to have done a visit under FCS Scrutiny Committee to that site from the point of view of the nursery there. One of the things I did, since I'm an architect mentioned here, is to go around and have a look at the site. It's absolutely unique. It's got 3 separate entrances. So the ability to flex on that site. And the question is, have we got an architect of talent doing the assessment on what could be put on that site, not specifically, but in terms of quantum? Because if you take the example of Marlborough School, it has 3 times the 3 times the play area on a site that's half the size of the Victorian School that was there before. It requires immense imagination. You don't always have to have outside space at the ground floor. The question is, therefore, if we have can we have a dynamic analysis to come back to this committee within 3 to 6 months that explores some of these things? Now, where we be next steps and where would be ideally in the future? Because I think that analysis was disentangled. Final thing to like put into that is, do we actually know that the rock that TfL threw in the pool with regard to 3.5 metres is the only thing that can happen? Their analysis of water runoff or engineering degradation or whatever could change in the future. If it does, they're the big elephant in the room. They will have their way with regard to repairs to Westway in any situation. So,
Christine, would you like to comment on those points? Yeah. So on the last bit, yes, TfL will. If they need to do something, they need to do something, and they can't say when it might be, whether it's 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. They just
be
need
5 metres rather than 3.5.
I don't think we need to make provision for more than 3.5, but it is quite a chunky piece of 3.5 all the way around the pillar, so it has quite an impact in any case. In terms of coming back, with an analysis in the timescale of 3 to 6 months in relation to the adult care bit, I think is reasonable. I would hope that we'd be able to make progress if we're looking at Kingsbridge, if that's what you were referring
It's
to.
an options analysis.
Yeah, exactly. I think that we maybe would hope to conclude about the suitability of the current space under the Westway for Maxilla before that time. So I don't know whether we want to be still sat here in 6 months' time wondering about that.
Mary, I said that I wouldn't speak on the last one and asking Maxilla people question. My question to Maxilla is that if
Can
you,
we come back to that?
the question is, would you be, because I said it in my previous thing, could I have an answer from Maxilla as to whether they would be happy to operate in the existing space?
They'd already said.
Adult social care was not there. Right?
Yeah,
Thank you. Sorry, I just want to come on the point about TfL just to answer your question. So we met with the asset operations manager back in December.
Oh, PFL, sorry, not TfL.
Yes, TfL. And what he effectively advised is, which I think I referenced in the paper, is that they had done some initial propping works up at Wood Lane, which kind of gives an indication as to, in terms of what emergency works could look like. And I think they did allude, Maxilla alluded to in their statement that he did advise that yes, that they would be open to working with us in terms of evenings and weekends, but in terms of the impact that would have to the service users, obviously that is still a concern in terms of time length and what that would mean for relocating them, the duration of the work. So just to kind of
That's the service users for adult social
For
care.
adult social
So
care, that is
I think we're coming back to the point that the Maxilla Kick is a more flexible use of the space and more easier to decant or to move temporarily than the adult social care, which makes it more suitable for the space. Great.
Thank you. Well, I said most of what I was going to say earlier. So basically, it's a bad deal for adult social care, and I agree with where it strikes me that option 3 is the blinding obvious one. As I read the paper, that's what left out of me. As long as Maxilla are happy to tell them tonight, there they are. So that would be where I ought to go, and I just wonder what the next steps would be. If that's the consensus, what would be the next steps to move us forward?
I think the next step is that we have a formal option paper that goes to the leadership team to be agreed that Maxilla CIC continue to work with them to create space for them in the existing building, and a whole separate piece of work then needs to go on to find ASC the right home ASAP. That would be the next.
Joanna, then Toby. Can I just ask, in the report on page 52, 5.81, you talk about a lease renewal wanting to remove the right of the obligation on TfL in grant compensation for maintenance. Appreciate if we don't seek a lease extension, that covers. But if we apply for a license to monitor or to do any works on Maxilla, might TfL then seek to renege on that provision even then? Or can we do works to Maxilla now that actually cover what we need to do without losing that provision?
It's a good question, and I think in reality it would be very difficult to withdraw permission and a license to do works if we're not fundamentally changing anything. And it may be a step too far for them to say, in order for us to grant a license, you have to sign this document that says, if we need the space back, we're not going to pay you any money, despite the length of your lease. I think that is so. If we left it like that and we don't try to extend the lease, I think that we would just seek our own legal advice as to how far that we could be pushed. If we wanted to extend the lease, then it's all up for grabs, isn't it? So then and a discussion to be had. But there is nothing in the current lease actually now that refers to specific compensation clauses. It's just covered by the Landlord and Tenant Act. So the compensation will just follow the act as things stand. That's we would expect to be compensated should we need to move. That's a modicum of good news for once. Toby, then Lucy.
Thank you. So yeah, there's one thing I have drawn a few times on this is a little clock. And I'm wondering about timelines, particularly for feasibility studies. Because it strikes me that having kind of pretty regular targets and then being able to know if you're hitting and missing them seems to me to make the most sense in terms of what, because that's going to affect, or specifically how that's going to affect delivery services and Maxilla, how you're going to need to fundraise for what, move projects forward. And I think a lot of the frustration with stuff like this is that there's just a lot of limbo. There's a lot of time in between where no one quite knows what, and there are all kinds of reasons for that. So yeah, what sort of timeline could we think about? I mean, I'll always be for as frequent check-ins as possible, just to sort of reassess and see what we need to do and all of that. But what would you say about that? How does that sound to you? What's feasible?
So I
in terms of recommendation.
sorry, yeah, I mean, I suppose what I was going to say first was we have to do this as proper option appraisal. So and the committee may conclude that option 3 is what you think makes more sense from what you're seeing now. But we will need to come back, as Councillor Wills said, with an option appraisal that sets that out. We can set out a timetable for that piece of work, and then whichever option we pursue for each, then I think we have to draw up a proper programme plan for those and not overpromise, underdeliver, because I think that is historically the issue, is that whatever the timetable that we may have committed to at one point in time, with the level of complexity, we were probably always going to miss it. So I think we need to do, there's 2 timetables, one the option appraisal, and then when the council has made its decision about what to do separately or together with each, and then we draw up a proper programme plan, and I think sticking to it and testing it at all times is obviously the sensible answer. I'm just going to refer to my colleague, just in terms of how realistic it is to do the option appraisal within a certain, whether we need to say, the 3 to 6 months that you talked about. I'd like to think that we'd have done that faster, but I wouldn't want to kind of commit the team to it and then be wrong and come back and. Do you like to comment on that?
Yes, so before you I want to overpromise, but no, I think realistically, in terms of being able to appoint an architect and actually undertake that stage 1 feasibility, I think you hit the nail on the head for the 3 to 6 months. I think that is reasonable to be able to do that. In terms of construction, I would definitely say you're looking in excess of around 56, 57 weeks once we get to a confirmed position with planning, etc. So I think all in all, I think we did advise roughly at least probably 3 years, and then obviously the construction would take an additional issue. You're probably looking at around 4 for a Kingsbridge option. For Kingsbridge, yes. Sorry. Obviously, we are leaning in terms of the conversations.
I think Christian was asking us referring to Maxilla to base on
for Maxilla, that's separate, but I'm splitting it out. So for adult social care purposes, you're definitely looking at between, I would say, 3 to 4 years, because you have to go through the full planning permission process, which does take time, public consultation, etc. You have to consider. For Maxilla side of things, because we do have the existing planning permission, I think you could probably get to a place of construction and everything being completed probably within the next year or so.
And the options appraisal, which was specifically what Christine asked you, how long that would take?
Similar, 3 to 6 months, I would say.
Right, okay.
Because we have to take into consideration their business plan also has to be reviewed and worked within that. So that's why I would advise a 3 to 6 month timescale.
Thank you. Any other questions?
That's one supplementary on that. Just
yes.
unlock a thing on
A
that.
quick one.
How long will it take the leadership team to decide that they can't put adult social care fully in Maxilla? How long will that take?
I didn't think very long, because I think this paper
paves the way for it.
Yeah, it doesn't. It's made it very clear,
and I think we'll be making a fairly clear recommendation from it.
I would be amazed if it took 5 minutes.
I think all this paper needs to probably have some any comments you make and some
firm recommendation. So in theory,
It's like going to next. But we don't have. Sorry, Lucy next. Sorry,
I think you just answered my question, which was just if it's going to be purely Maxilla, understanding that timeline as to so they can look ahead in terms of fundraising, and I think that's what you just answered. My next question was just around if say for example ASC was deemed suitable for Maxilla and with the learning disability population growing by 44% by 2040, whether we consider or Kingsbridge is the company that I don't think this is purely an ASC question you can't answer. But if not, do we have any upcoming developments that we can be thinking about a larger space like that? And then on top of that, in the interim, say if this is a longer project, the ASC, the next 45 years, given the state of St Mark's, there's something that we can be doing there, because I know how desperate that situation is.
I think they're looking at all options at the moment. There's so many options, but it's actually honing in which one is really, really going to work.
Yeah, I mean, we illustrated the report with, for example, Kingsbridge, because we know that we bought it for learning disability purposes. And so that, you know, it's an obvious option for us to look at as an alternative day centre as well for people with learning disabilities. So that made sense. But of course, we're looking at all of the options, including what would you do? What would you do meanwhile? What can we do now in relation to St Mark's? Because we can't just leave it. So we make sure it's compliant and safe, but actually is it suitable? And we have to look at that. And what would you do with St Mark's if you were to say, actually, that is our long term? How would we do that? And so I think we need to look at a range of options, including other sites that we're not in a position to say at this point in time, or potential movers, if we are going to move forward to separate the two out. To get to the point where there is a firm decision, you can form a view and feel like you have. And you know, and we're hearing that we would still want to present a proper option appraisal that gives you the eyes wide open version of that as a decision. I think the point is that you'll need that before you can kind of. The point is that there are other alternatives for adult social care. This paper and this discussion is not about which one is the right one. That's a whole different ballgame. What we're really here today doing is listening to Maxilla CRC and looking at what the options, potential options are. And there's clearly a drift towards option 3, which I certainly would favour myself. But Prissy, and then Prissy, and then I'll open the floor then.
Christine, I mean, most of the things have been said already, but I was just, you know, there are just so many moving pieces in the whole. It doesn't matter how many times you rewrite it, you come up with different scenarios. And what worries me is the cost of it. I mean, just looking at the cost, it started, you know, since 2014, it has so many potentials. The budget started from 4.3 million June 15 to 8.9 million in 2022. And, you know, I mean, where are we going? Is it really still pursuing this? Is it, and has it always been priced? Even if you were to do the 3 to 6 month appraisal, is it really worth spending any further time on this project, or do we just, you know? So
can I answer that? Practically, yes, it is. So we made a commitment many years ago to the community about Maxilla CRC, which we are going to fulfil, and we desperately need on the adult social care piece. We desperately need a new facility for the day users. So yes, but as I like to say to Christine, time is money, and we need to. I think coming back to Will's question, which I think partly answers yours, I think actually there might be a 2-stage decision for the leadership team. The first question is, do we now agree that we will keep Maxilla and we'll find somewhere else for adult social care? I think that possibly that decision can be made, but then we need to do that full set of options appraisal about where adult social care can be. And I think that will help with the money question, because then, you know, we can push on with Maxilla, which, as we've explained, is much further ahead. It's already got permission for that building, and stop wasting more time and money on that side, and then stop on the other thing, find the right side, and then do that right. So that's the way I sort of see it. So
very helpful.
But we have to do them both. Yes.
Okay. And can I have that to the floor? Oh, sorry,
I've just got a quick question. Toby clarified it with Willie. I just wanted to know, just out of curiosity, you said that this project exceeded 1 million. Can we have the exact figures, please?
Spent to date.
Yes, spend today. It's in excess, but when we come to the next meeting, I can definitely provide that.
Or we can circulate it.
Yes, we can circulate it.
And maybe we should give you a drawing so you can see with the 3.5 around the pillars.
I think,
I'm
did we
doing
have
that
to
to
go
say,
last time?
we'll make sure we include the plan for you to see a demonstration.
And a very clear understanding of how that, I mean, I know it's become a permanent flooring, but in practice, what would that feel like? Could you have, could you actually use any of that space at all? And if so, for what? And how mobile would it have to be? So that would be very helpful. And I'm going to open, I know Claire's got some questions, but I'll come back to those in a second. I'm going to open it up to the floor to ask questions.
Very quick comment before question. I'm sure, even as saying on behalf of Maxilly, I'm sure we're very warm to the idea of option 3 being explored, but after speaking from our experience of working with Aperture Social Care, I'm sure they'll be very disappointed with that suggestion. Not that they might agree, they might not agree, but they've been working on this project as long as us, if not longer. So I would encourage having that conversation with them as early as possible, because they speak from the experiences of their services, and so they need an urgent solution as soon as possible. Again, speaking it from as positive as we are about essentially securing the space. So the two questions that I have are, you mentioned the feasibility of the current facility and a few outstanding items. I was wondering what more needs to be studied in order to have a full scope of understanding about the pitfalls of the current facility. So that's my first question. A question was raised about timelines. I think we've been on the receiving end of many timelines. So what provision would be made to make sure the next timeline that we get would be more realistic? And the question of an options appraisal was floated in terms of putting a costed plan for suggested alternative sites. And if one is also to be put together for the Maxilla City facility, what would that include? Would that include a dedicated project manager? Would that include the fit out? What is that the options appraisal that would go into the Maxilla City, assuming that option 3 would be explored?
Who'd like to respond to those questions? And Marwan, I didn't ask you, I should have asked you protocol wise, if you do have a question to come back to. Not now, but do you?
Yeah, thank you, Chair.
I'll come back to you then.
Thank you.
You may have to repeat them because you had
I think the first one was about adult care, and I think we just obviously we're having discussions with adult care. So I don't.
The first question was what other problems there might be with the site.
Yeah, what other items need to be explored for a full scope
Feasibility.
feasibility?
Yeah.
On the current
under
the Westway.
Yeah.
So under the Westway right now, so it's more to do with, I think we spoke about the cafe side of things. We definitely need to explore that more with the architect, see how that can be configured. And then once we get to a design freeze place, then we will then move to work with our quantity surveyor to be able to cost and obviously come back to Scrutiny to advise of what kind of costs we'll be looking at to develop it. And then in terms of your other question, in terms of timeline, so I think following here today, once we get to a place of understanding what works well for you guys, obviously considering the risks associated with that, if we are happy with moving forward with Maxilla remaining at remaining at Maxilla, then we can, like I said, pick up the discussions with the architect to review the design, make sure there is a freeze, and then they'll be able to start working out the design, because as it stands right now, I don't know if you remember, I was saying we are currently at stage 4, we paused it given the TfL issues. Once that's bottomed out, we will then be able to move the design forward through the stage 5 effectively.
Has that answered all your questions?
Yeah, the last one was about the options appraisal that would be done for the alternative facility, and would one be done for the current facility? And if so, would it include things like a dedicated project manager for Maxilla? It's an open question.
I mean, in terms of the options appraisal, so your business plan would have to fit within that. So obviously, once we get to a place of, like I said, design phase, I think that would help with regards to timelines of program, etc. And then you then need to provide an updated business plan for review and consideration. In terms of dedicated project manager, yes, obviously I have been on the project. But there is someone else that has joined the team that I'm working alongside to assist in terms of day-to-day operational matters. So we can definitely give you assurance for that, and that you will have a dedicated person to be able to liaise with. There was another part to your question. It was just trying to run through my mind all of them.
For context, the business plan, as we understand it, is more to do with operational running of the space and making sure it's sustainable. Because and my question is more around the commitments around from the council. If you, for instance, how you would see the space being fitted out, if so, to what spec?
I think that's part of us working through the design and freezing that design, because until you do that, you won't be able to inform the costs. So that will be a discussion that we will have to have with you to work out within the budget constraints what we could assist you with in terms of fit out. But that's all open for discussion. There isn't any kind of definitive answers that we can give you right now for that. We still need to work that through with the architect. So just to be clear, that your business plan will definitely feed into that, because if we're not clear on in terms of the cafe side of things, if we're not saying that it is, that if that was something that has to be up for consideration, obviously we'd have to review what that space would be. Does that make sense?
Good. But I get the feeling that the project, if with the two are separated, becomes a lot less complex on the Maxilla side, which is a bonus.
Exactly.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the Maxilla, and thanks for giving me a chance to ask a question. Partly being answered regarding the project officer or project manager, because I can see from my fellow councillor when she mentioned 2 projects going on with a different level of complexity. My question is there any governance structure, clear government? Because I can see there are 2 main key stakeholders in this place. And then I can see the scope is not well defined. And this will be, as you highlighted, there are different stakeholders that really require a very careful analysis. So what I will, and then
governance structure.
Governance structure, as anything to do with project management methodology, this is a quite well established. So as a ward councillor for Nottingdale, I'm glad to see my council commitment to the prosperity of the area. So that's very comforting, Chair.
But you'd like some comfort around governance structures. Who could
governance and stakeholder analysis, especially regarding risk register, because 5 years and then to come up with TFL, other factors, these are very key stakeholder. So these are
questions. Who's going to respond to that?
In terms of governance structure, so there is a set governance structure. So SIP, as it stands right now, we are the main client, and then adult social care feeds into that process, along with obviously Maxilla CIC as another stakeholder. There were project management meetings that we were having, but obviously given the TFL issues that have arisen, they've been paused temporarily, but I think the plan will be to resume them, which will have an ordered structure in terms of set meeting dates that we'll have throughout the month, which will address agenda items, obviously review risk, that will all be minuted with actions to review. But I think given the context of where we've been, it's just been slightly difficult. And what we've replaced them with is kind of ad hoc meetings that we've had, obviously with the members, etc., to address TFL points.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, this might be the time where I mentioned that Claire, who's also a ward councillor, Councillor Simmons has messaged me just to express the view that options 1 and 2 are clearly not preferable, and that pending further analysis, she would urge towards options 3 and 4. So again, not dissimilar from the meeting. Another question.
Not to create more complexities, but given the kind of architect that has been on the project throughout, and given the potential change of use of space, would there be any consideration to including or looking at other architects that could work with the stakeholders of the building that may be better suited for the outcomes of the building?
I think we want to consider procurement within that. That's the first thing. That's quite important. We are in a PCSA with them. So if we were to go down that route, then we'll be having to look at terminating. So if we're talking about timescales, that would prolong the timescales, because then you'd have to go through the governance process again to be able to re-procure somebody and bring them on board. So at the moment, obviously, that they have had the benefit of having that historical background and knowledge on the scheme, which has been beneficial for us, for them to be able to pick it back up. But that if that is a route that we choose, then you'd have to take into consideration the timescales associated with termination and then having to re-procure and onboard a new architect.
Yeah, no,
Just clarify that, we are now talking about the whole building going across to Maxim CIC, is that right?
I think
the options that was.
I think what we'd have to do is we'd have to look at, we've got a space now, which is the whole building. Part of it was Maxilla, part of it adult social care. If we go and split, I don't think we then spend up the same money doing the same with the building. And because of the pillars, we'll have to look at what we do with the bit that adult care we're in. So we'd have to do that. And on the architect point, obviously procuring a new architect will be something that might be worthwhile doing. But in any case, because we are out of time on the procurement of the main contractor in any case, so we won't be able to continue with the same contractor on that space, and that would have to be subject to a new procurement, which was built into the timetable that Stacey has given anyway. So maybe this is the time for us to consider that.
I don't ask, I just I'd ask that with
so it's worth
any defined idea of that.
Greg and then Lucy.
Thanks, Chair. I'm sure you'll be suggesting that this comes back to us in your sort of 3 to 6 month timeline.
I can hardly resist.
Can I suggest that we have a committee visit to the site before that happens, and at the risk of doing it in a working day when I can't come, but I think it would be a really good idea.
Excellent, that's suggested. Good. Thank you, Lucy.
I appreciate ASC aren't here tonight, just in terms of some of the questions that I asked. When will we have like a bit more of a meaningful conversation about when we can ask those questions about the sort of interim period with St Mark's, and maybe also we should sit St Mark's as committee, because I think to understand what that team is under there, and that I visited them about 18 months ago and they were very.
I think probably that's an adult social care meeting visit. I mean, I've visited both sites, but I completely agree with you. But I think, in a sense, I think my sense is that we're going to suggest option 3, and that therefore adult social care then splits off as a problem. Exactly. Yeah. So, Akhil.
Thank you. I wanted to ask, just given our experience so far over the past 5 years, we know there's been a lot of change in the team in terms of the corporate memory being lost at key points where we're unable to actually base our conversation off things we'd already agreed or discussed at different points in time. And given that case, and given the fact that it seems that we've had to circle around in quite a few conversations to remind about the commitments that we've made to the project, we would also like to know, going forward, what commitments can be made by the project team to ensure that A, we get regular updates in terms of the co-design process, but B, making sure that we're not informed information from residents. So we're finding out information after other people find about it. So we're now feeling like we're not part of a partnership and we're not just an extension of a project that we're not to be involved in.
That's a very fair question, Christine. I think we can't do an awful lot about the change over a 5-year period, and I do appreciate that it has had an impact on the Maxilla CIC, because they have dealt with different people at different times, and I don't think that the record keeping has been good enough to be able to make sure that we continue. So I think we've just got to accept that criticism. I think it's about a commitment to moving forward. I think we have moved forward with that commitment already, and I'm not sure that I understand which bits we haven't shared and we have shared elsewhere. So I think that, I think we would commit to that, but I don't recognise. My advice would be that it's worth committing to a regular, frequent update, even if that update is nothing, because I think it's reassuring for everybody to know that any news they haven't not got news because you've forgotten to send out your newsletter or your update. They haven't got any news because there isn't any, and that's drawn from experience with other projects. Like the whole Sloane Street project. Actually, residents and people want to know on a regular basis. So I think if you commit to that, would be very. Yeah, and I think we've been in a bit of a gap paused whilst we've been in this process, and
And
even that gap probably
needs
made
to
it
be
feel so much worse, but yeah.
So that was done too
Well,
much.
Well, I think, Chair, there were some communications, but not formal ones in meetings, because I certainly had conversations with some members of the committee about this.
yes, so maybe formalise it, make it more frequent as well as regular. And that might be one of our recommendations.
Yes.
Going forward.
And the good news is that Maxwell Associate will continue with Sarah under community. The bad news is it continues with me under property. So there we go.
I'm sure they can brace up and take it. And do I get the sense from the committee that we are veering towards option 3? Our recommendation would be option 3. Jack, you're writing curious, was that because I've forgotten something?
No, I'm writing down what you recommend.
It's often a sign that I've stupidly forgotten something. So I think we're recommending option 3, and we're also recommending that Maxwell CIC get regular frequent updates, even if they're nil reports, if that's all right.
Thank you, Chair.
So I'm going to move on to the next paper.
Yes,
Toby.
please.
Is that all right?
Yes.
Just very, very brief. It's not a question. I just, I think it just worth having noted that Claire's interest is not just as a ward councillor, but also as a member of the committee and a chair of housing communities.
I did mention she was the new councillor. Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. Thanks everyone for coming.
I'll take care of when you are. I've Sarah gave me house, so we're no, my work.
I hope we'll get some Benjamin.
Let's try this post order as quickly as possible on the list. Joanna, thank you. Right, enough, settle down, everybody. To
I can start.
introduce this piece of deja vu or
Deja vu.
Thanks, sir.
Okay, well, thank you, Mary. I want to start by paying tribute to the officers, Lisa, Liam, everybody else, exec directors and lead members who have played such a big role in putting together the budget. I've said before that I think it's probably the hardest year since I've joined the leadership team in which to balance the budget, particularly as a result of the worsening headwinds on temporary accommodation, social care, and the uncertainty that we've had about government funding until quite late in the day. And against this backdrop, we're still trying to deliver our council plan, so making it a greener, safer and fairer borough and keeping our costs to residents down. And I think the paper that we now have makes good on that for the most part. I particularly welcome the growth on clean streets, making the blitzes permanent. It's a tangible improvement in the service we offer around litter picking, jet washing, graffiti busting, things that we know our residents really care about. There's been investment over the past year in improving community safety, things like CCTV, responding to the recent spate of violence. But it's important that we retain the fiscal firepower to address community safety. I'm also pleased that there's more than £5 million now in this budget paper to address the temporary accommodation pressure. We know that's the biggest pressure, not just financially, but also morally. We have a duty to house people and to look after the most vulnerable. And so we've gone the extra mile to do that. So there's a greener, safer and fairer. But having said all of that, there have been difficult decisions. And as you can see, there are 16 plus £1 million of savings as part of this budget. I'm happy that some of this work is a result of transformation, which we've talked about several times at the committee. Next year, I'd like even more of it to be the result of transformation. But you can see, for example, we're looking at how we deliver the Parks Police Service in environment and neighbourhoods, how we use our corporate estate to rationalise workspace and generate additional income in housing and social investment, and also at how we can provide the best possible service
through the introduction of a CRM in resources, so transformation in lots of different directorates. And we tried to protect core services as well, so twice weekly bin collections, our parking permits, our schools, our parks. And I think that is very good news. Many of you will know I'm pretty hawkish on taxes, so I'm happy that we have worked hard enough to retain the flexibility that we don't have to go ahead with a 5% tax rise out of a kind of force majeure. I think that is a testament to some really good and hard work across the organisation. But before I hand over to you, I will just briefly address the threats on the horizon. So in addition to the things that are causing an overspend, like I flagged in TA and social care, there are also threats in terms of government funding. We've had announcements from the government recently that they may assume certain levels of council tax, for example, when they set their funding for boroughs. That can have quite a dramatic negative impact on the council's overall financial position. And also the looming spectre of fair funding, which again may have a significant adverse impact. So it's been a difficult year, and I'm pleased that we've managed to protect budgets and deliver things that residents really care about in line with the council plan. But I also think next year will be tough, and so we need to continue to steel ourselves and double down on transformation.
Thank you very much. It's good to have a balanced budget. As ever, who wants to go on? Sidney.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so just looking at page 40 of something like 19.2, just talking a bit about businesses. We've seen that in the budget there was some rises for businesses. I wondered two things: whether we can do anything specifically for businesses within the borough to keep the high streets working, and then I noticed on 19.2, so the Chancellor announced during his budget. Was that Rachel Reeves or was that somebody else? It was during his budget first month. So you're talking about the budget that a few months ago from Rachel Reeves. Okay, you were talking about it from a year ago. I don't know which budget.
I can start and talk a bit about how we support businesses, and then you may want to come in on the drafting and sort of the finer details. I think we do a lot to support businesses. We've got an economic development department within the council that looks at our relationship with businesses. We've also facilitated the introduction of business improvement districts because we know that one of our roles has to be as a facilitator. We can't directly influence the fate of individual businesses or even of sectors. I don't think picking winners is the business of government particularly. But we have sought to intervene and improve the situation where we can. I always like the example of our Prescott Dining as an example where we've been able to increase the footprint on which businesses can trade, so enabling them to generate more revenue if they're successful. More widely on businesses, I think we have a long-standing concern about business rates. Clearly, we generate more business rate receipts than pretty much anywhere else in the country. Were we able to retain more of that, that would pretty much at a stroke address the financial challenge in front of us. But the government hasn't, as far as I'm aware, given any indication it's going to review that wholesale in the short term. Do you want to either of you add to that?
Not to that, but just to say that as a typo, it should say budget or their budget. So apologies for that.
Thanks very much. So a few relatively small questions. So this is still based on the draft settlement, but what, as far as I can see, what would still change between now and when we vote on the budget in a few weeks' time? First question. So what are the known unknowns? And then some detail. Paragraph 10.6, where we've got a reference to the council investigating options to deploy institutional investment, e.g. from the pension fund to unlock additional supply of homes for the survey scale. How's that going? I'll say a bit more about that, please. Paragraph 15.5 refers to the corporate strategy function, and I'd just like to have an understanding of how big that, how expensive that is. So you might not be able to answer that tonight because it's a bit wise detail, but can you tell me how much that corporate strategy function is in the department, how much it costs? Please, if you can't answer it tonight, then I can have a written answer on that, please. And then 17.5 is the last one. We've got the VOA amount changing the way that HMOs are calculated, and that in terms of the council tax base, and it seems to have not surprisingly had a negative effect on our council tax take, and that's quite worrying. And I've come across another negative benefit or negative effect of this happening and completely separate from budgeting. But why have they done that? Do we know? And have we pushed back on this action? Those are my questions.
Do you want to start with those now?
Yeah, so I'll start from the top and work down. So the draft settlement, the settlement was actually finally published today, the final settlement. This afternoon it's being discussed in Parliament on Wednesday. We've had a very quick look this afternoon, and the only thing we can see that's changed is they have now announced funding for national insurance contributions, but we just need to work through what that really means for the council. So there is a section in this report that says, there may not be enough funding. If you remember, we talked about this here before, the funding is only for employers, in this instance the council. All of our contracts we do not get any more funding for, so we've built 2.4 million in already. We've made an allocation of 1.9 at the moment. The allocation awarded is 1.9 as well, but this is only for the general fund. The 1.9 needs to cover both the general fund and the HRA. So as we say, there will be a small shortfall in the amount of funding. Quite how much that is, we will work through tomorrow, and we will make sure that the report's obviously been published as well for leadership. I don't really know what that is and how we propose to fund that difference by the time it gets to leadership. But I think it would be around about £500,000.
Okay, some other questions.
And just to say, and I'm really fair, it's element the national insurance contribution, so it's a decision for the council to make. Is it give it all to the general fund, or give some to the HRA? That's a conversation we need to have over the next 24 hours or so.
And then the pension fund question was next, I think.
Yeah, so the next one was around so we are continuing to look at the sites. That work is ongoing to find suitable sites, and then working with valuers, etc. to do that. So yeah, that's not been forgotten. That is still ongoing and is quite advanced.
Yeah. So I just said, I think there is a lot of political will to explore options in this area. As Lisa says, finding a site is difficult. I think working up a model as well that is mutually satisfactory is a challenge. It's quite an innovative thing that we're trying to do, and that's a good thing. But it's taking probably more time than we want to do it. I think that ignorance.
Corporate strategy, I don't know the number. Do you want me to put my head? But I'm just going to say I didn't know whether you wanted to do.
Maxine knows off the top of her head.
I'm afraid I don't have the staffing budget number, the staffing on the top of my head, but I can share with you. But I suppose I just want to say this: so corporate strategy and transformation is a small team actually relative to other councils. So Holly's the head of service, and it's.
I do know what the budget is. If that is something you want to know, so I think it's about just over 750 for the corporate strategy, transformation, performance, business insight.
750k. That includes the headcount as well, the cost of the headcount.
Yeah.
And that includes the £350,000 that was, indeed we had some challenge from the committee last time around, which was specifically committed to supporting the savings and transformation work that the council is. So that's a new part of the budget. In fact, we've ended up spending slightly less than that, but in addition to some of the existing corporate strategy content.
So the answers are in the room, thank you. And that's a written answer, and then I have a final question.
And the last question was on the to be honest, I don't know why they did it. I think it was to simplify some of the work from their side. I don't know. We'll take that one away for our business.
Yeah, so is there a way we can perhaps challenge that? Do we have a means of challenging their decision making?
So it is a decision they've already made. So I don't think we can challenge that actual decision, but we do regularly respond to any consultations that do come out. I'll check whether we did have a consultation on this one and whether we responded or not. It's not within my remit, so I'll take it away.
Could we perhaps have an answer on that? Was there a consultation?
Yeah,
so
sure.
Did we respond?
Yeah.
And if not, could we write to them and
express the displeasure that we're losing money because of their decision. Because it won't just be us.
Good, thank you. Yes, well,
First of all, thank you to the governance officers for supplying an index on the way into this meeting. Because, one of the things I wanted to say was that this paper, this supplement, is larger than the whole of the paper for the rest of the meeting. Arrived very late. It really is a compote of what we've seen before in many cases. So some of it's familiar, but the way it's been put together is extremely difficult to digest.
An index, I think, is your
An index, but also the structure of paper really related to the index. Because some things are thematic and some things are departmental. That cross-reference needs to happen if you understand this paper. And I think that in terms of next year, it's too late this year, next year, that just is a very important thing to have achieved well in advance. And if the numbering has to be within this supplement, which is possibly a way of disentangling it from the agenda paper, then it can be done as supplement for agenda paper number like A5 and then the numbers there afterwards. I'm being pedantic, but I think some attention needs to be paid for between now and then. Second thing is on transformations. I've heard there's lots of references to the transformations issue, which I'm glad, obviously. And we've now had a cost of that service that's pulling it all together, or broader service of transformation and so on. What would be useful would be to get some per annum and also cumulative build within the budget as to what transformations have achieved. Plan insurance services, we've got that. We get each year now what they said they've been saving and how much they saved over a period. In other words, where the budget would be, they haven't done those year by year transformational exercises. The other thing I wanted to mention was the risks. The question around that are we reassured that we've got enough contingency corporate to cover such risks as temporary accommodation, social care, high needs cases, and so on, because those continuously we're getting further bad news on those fronts. And finally, the question is, what is since this is now 2025, are we going to hit our commitment for carbon zero 2030?
Thank you. Who'd like to answer those ones?
Let's start that together. So the first one was
indexing structure.
Yeah, it's nitty-gritty work, but it could be done earlier in the year rather than at the last minute. And then
the second one was around the transformation per annum savings and cumulative savings. And people have already made a commitment that in the quarterly monitoring reports, we will be reporting on that. Yeah. Contingency, so we've got 8.2 million in contingency, 3.7 in the corporate contingency, 2.7 for temporary accommodation, and then there's a further 1.8 for social care. That's the best scenario at that point in time. We've also got centrally held budgets as well for inflation and contracts. The national insurance element of contracts that I mentioned earlier that we weren't being funded for, and the pay awards. So overall, we've got just under 20 million in both of those two.
But when one individual child costs £1 million per annum, it's not. That's it doesn't sound that.
So
well, that's a balance, isn't it? I mean, is it enough? We don't know because we don't know how the next 12 months will.
And are you also challenging central government as to whether they're going to get involved in those very high needs cases?
I think we do make the case to central government.
As well.
That's the answer.
Yeah, but I mean, I would say I think putting in that much into contingency is a pretty
enough for now, and a conversation with central government and review later.
And again, we've made a commitment in the quarterly monitoring reports that will give more information around how we're allocating.
Last question is 2030.
And it's a recommendation in the budget.
Will we meet carbon zero? I try not to make crystal balls, but it's certainly within, it is certainly possible to hit that in terms of net zero. There is a choice for the council to make about its appetite to ramp up investment, whether that's in the technology that can reduce emissions in our borough or whether there's an offsetting question. I mean, certainly the sums are extremely high. The financial position is extremely difficult. It isn't easy to hit net zero, but it is possible to do so.
Ask Mary and Jackie, is that a question for suggesting there needs to be an update review for a ESC service selection?
That might be a question for.
Well, I think we had
Yeah.
a review on it
Yeah.
in December, we'll have another one in next December, Johnny was all over it in the detail then with his officers.
Thank you. Any other questions on the budget? Sylvia?
Just a thank you. I have a quick question on pension. We know that there's some talk of central government consolidating local council pensions. And if they do consolidate pensions, will that take away some of the money that you may need to have used to buy properties or us?
I suppose we don't know, but it's possible that it could.
Also take away our ability to subsidise the council by not paying as much as we do now into our, much as we do into the pension fund, presumably. Because at the moment, we're saved from having to make such large contributions as other councils make.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, in terms of our budget, we currently budget for 15% contributions. The average in the local government pension scheme, I think, is close to 25%.
Exactly.
So, yeah, that is a risk.
That's a huge risk.
We need to wait and see what the consultation is and how that pans out. We just don't know.
Thank you. I think that's useful.
I was just going to ask a question on social care funding, and obviously the extensions are welcome. Do we think this is sustainable? And from your conversation this year, looking forward, how confident are you?
Sorry, I didn't hear what you said. You were
just about social care funding, and obviously there's been an extension, which is very welcome, but whether we think this is temporary or looking forward, given this is one of the biggest gaps we're concerned about, what the conversations, if they're giving you confidence.
So this is the last year at the moment of funding as is. Johnny referred to the funding reform conversations that have just started. We would like to hope that there would continue to be funding as is, if not more funding, but at this moment in time, we really don't know. You know, they're looking at how they will allocate funding to local government, and it could be based on deprivation, maybe multiple deprivation and need. So we just don't know what we might get at this point in social care funding.
But we're going to be responding to the government consultation on this.
Thank you.
So we will be making that.
Thank you. Yeah, question about section 29 and 30. So that's reserves and contingency essentially our budgets, which there are quite a few, different active subcategories. And I'm never very clear, could just be my fault, what the process actually involves as to when, who decides when we can spend what on what active reserves, right? Like, it's simply that you put it.
What's the governance around spending reserves?
I mean, the short answer is it depends on the reserve and on the terms of reference in the reserve. So there are some reserves that require a lead member in consultation with their exec director. There are others that require full LT. Above certain thresholds for some reserves, like 250,000, you would have to come to a public meeting and it would be voted on by leadership team. So there isn't a one size fits all, but we can share the terms of reference.
I'd really like
That's helpful to know that there are terms of reference.
Exactly. I
So
didn't
people
even
might
know
not
that myself. So I'm going to say, that would be great. I really appreciate that. And also, oh God, completely.
Chair, I don't really know if I've got two questions, and it's to do with adult and social care and the budget and the way to spend. But I don't know if this is my committee, because we discussed in the adult and social care committee about substance misuse services, which is in 7.75 on page 16. And the Director of Public Health annual report in 2023, which says 3,600 adults aged over 18 in the borough have a high risk of drug independence. And I was just wondering, that's something that we need to look at, because the annual report also highlights that there are child safeguarding assessment associated with drug and alcohol misuse. So if we can actually look into this. So I would like to know what are we doing to join up support for adults and children and families
I think
affected.
that's probably a question for adult social
No,
care.
it is, because if it's in the budget, because if it's for spending, because when it be more possible focusing or spending earlier for families with early interventions by substance use by the way of reducing social care costs and budgeting pressures.
I understand, and you're asking about how we can prioritise allocation
Yes,
of money to
allocation of money.
misuse.
So
In terms of how that currently works, the Director for Public Health has a statutory role that gives her the discretion to spend public health grant money in a way that she sees fit, so long as it's in accordance with the public health priorities that have been set out in our scheme. We do review that periodically. She would be in dialogue with the lead member about that. And to a lesser extent, possibly with the, well, you would like to think with the wider organisation,
Yes.
because there should be some read across. But essentially, the decision-making power, and this is unusual, more or less sits with the Director of Public Health in a way that it doesn't from any other budgets.
So it comes from the public health budget.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You had a second question?
Oh, they both of them.
I thought you said you had two. Never mind. In the absence of any other questions, I just wanted to comment. I think the level of council tax suggested is prudent, and I'm very glad it's not the full whack, but it seems a prudent level under the circumstances. But in the absence of any other comments or questions, thank you very much. I think we made a recommendation about VOA and looking into that and making representations if we haven't done some other forums. But thank you. And now we're going to turn to the statements, the budget working group report. Final report for budget. And I'm going to hand over to PC to introduce this one group.
On page 121.
Page 121. Everybody is lost. Concentrating.
Yeah, on the supplementary papers, page 121.
Yeah.
Right, okay. As you all know, budget scrutiny is an essential part of the council's governance framework and is led by the OSC. Scrutiny of the draft budget 25-26 was carried out by OSC and for the and 4 select committees in November and December 2024. The budget working group was chaired by myself and consisted of councillors Veal, Hammond, Pascal, Simmons, and Wade, all of whom attended both meetings. Councillor Dent Code, who attended the first meeting only, and Councillor Hargreaves, who attended the first meeting and was replaced by Councillor Levy Sands in the second meeting. The budget working group made 8 recommendations, which are set out in the report. And I guess my suggestion is, sorry, 9, apologies, 9, apologies. So I suggest we go through each one in turn, and if anybody has any questions, please raise them. Do anybody, do I need to go through it, or does anybody have any questions? Or are you happy with first?
I think it's fairly
self-explanatory, but you know, it's
I just wondered about recommendation 3 in terms of temporary vacancies. Given the implications of national insurance now, I think there's almost an element to that. So it's not just in terms of impacting the front line, it's also questioning the budgetary pressure the use of temporary staff has. And so whether you might think about adding that as well.
The pressure again.
To view it also in light of the
to amend the recommendation to read
essentially considers council priorities and does not impact the front line. So it's essentially considers the impact on the budget, for example, additional national.
It doesn't affect frontline services or the budget.
Yeah. Or detrimentally
removing
the
budget
or something along those lines.
Positive impact. Right. Okay. Excellent suggestion. Thank you.
Can I make a point, generate point about all of the 9 recommendations that, assuming that the leadership team agree that they will take these on board, but there is also some agreement about the time frame for response to these, because in the past, some things being agreed to happen, but the time frame has been very unknown. Varied a lot according to the record.
Jackie, what's the normal practice here?
The statutory, I think the report will be acknowledged by the leadership team next week, and statutory date to give full responses within 8 weeks, but it may be that some responses could be given.
That's not what I'm referring to. I fully understand that.
Oh, sorry.
And we held them to it last year, and that's fine. And they did, so that's fine. The thing is not that. It's if there's going to be a report on a particular issue, be it sources of finance, working, giving reports on transformation. Maxine's already given assurance on that as to when they're going to happen. But on some of the other recommendations, if there's an agreement to do something, the question is by when.
Maybe that could be included in the response.
Yes. So if in the response, the leadership team could agree whether or not they wish to take on board the recommendation, but also within what time frame they're going to do it.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you. Good idea. Toby, so
yeah, sorry. Two quick ones. One is actually just the Joanna's recommendation to add to number 3. I'm not quite sure what not negatively affecting the budget would look like. So I mean, I'm assuming we've probably nothing to negatively affect.
I think it's detrimental.
The budget or detrimental. Okay, I might not be convinced about that personally. So there's a priorities down. So I think I'll just mention that and move on. And also just say my other note is on timeline for future scrutiny recommendation A, reports to include information shared with tenants and leaseholders. I'm not passing that correctly, I don't think. The leadership team is recommended to develop a timeline for future scrutiny reports, include the HRA budgeting process and information shared with tenants and leaseholders. So you're talking about a timeline on sharing information?
Yeah.
Right,
yes.
okay.
So I think one of the issues with the HRA budget, or perhaps
No,
one of the issues with the HRA budget is that to some extent it's hampered by the quite rational need to engage with leaseholders and tenants and get that feedback to feed into to subsequent reports. And I think we need a clearer idea of how that all works.
Sure.
In order that so the rationale for any delays or the impact of any delays is more easily understood. Basically, the aim is to get those papers to us earlier, and I know Claire's very keen on that and working towards
If it couldn't be done in that way, at least they could report on what the range of options
Yes.
because the early appraisal in terms of our cycle of meetings needs the range of options earlier. So if they can't, adult social care, furniture and services, none of the departments will have final information until much later in the process. But most of the other ones manage to put in either saying that this is our best guess and the range of risks are, or there's a range of options, A to C, or whatever. But in some way, HRA must be able to program their work. Therefore, they must have a plan A, even if the winds are going to push them wildly.
Plan B and plan C. And I think this recommendation is fine as it stands, but behind that, Claire is working to engage with.
Especially if it has the thing that we've agreed on, or my suggestion, which is the leadership team come back and give a positive time frame in which to do.
Yes, could I Johnny back to? I think Johnny wants to comment.
I'm happy. Mine's wider comments. So I'm happy to.
No, I was just going to come back on recommendation 3. So if Johnny wants to finish on that.
I think the point that I was going to make is that there's nothing individually here that on the face of it looks unacceptable to me in my capacity as lead member, but I think there's quite a high cumulative burden in terms of the reporting element of this. Pretty much every recommendation requires officers to write a longer report. Now individually each thing you're asking for may be sensible, but you've already talked about structure and length of reports, and I suppose I'm thinking of our ability to deliver priorities quickly and to focus resource. I'm a little bit concerned just on the face of it, and I don't want to say anything kind of definitive about recommendations. And clearly one would always want to welcome scrutiny, and as I say, kind of the information isn't itself something that I'm not comfortable sharing, but I want to put that word of caution, because I think you've observed this year, it's already been difficult for officers to put together information in the volume and the structure that you've asked for. And it seems to me this will increase the bar quite substantially.
Thank you for that comment. Any other? Yes.
Just on recommendation 3, even to Toby's comments, I wondered whether actually the Citizens Council priorities and the impact on the budget should go there rather than after the end does not impact frontline services.
Did you get that?
No, could you say that again, please?
So essentially it moves from the end of the sentence to get considers the council priorities and the impact on the budget.
I think Johnny's point is well made, but I definitely feel that we didn't, in particular around stuff like growth bits, we did need more information. I don't think we should be shy of asking for that when we need it. But I think it's absolutely a right thing to say, and we're all in, we all often ask for more information in an unthinking way and then don't use it. And I think we're right to make us mindful of that. But in this instance, I don't think
we've taught it quite carefully.
Yeah, I mean, Mary,
I think we'll be quite
I'd like to flag up that in FCS that we were not happy by the assurance that overspends would be litigated by the end of the year. We asked for supplementary paper. We got a 1-page paper within a week, which gave it assurance. And they're going to have to they're going to have to produce it, do it. It was the assurance that we needed, and it was a very useful from the officers to the select. I think it's stuff they had. It wouldn't take long. It wasn't a full paper; it was just a 1-page briefing.
Family and children's may be a good example, but not every service has the same level of capacity, and will be able at pace to turn things around. But I take the point, and Mary's acknowledged that.
I mean, we had a massive problem when it hasn't this year.
Yeah,
whereas actually when you compare it to last year, we didn't. Relatively speaking, this year has just gone the opposite direction. So it's actually resetting to minimum of where we were last year, not improving on last year.
Really?
Toby, one more point?
Yeah, just to ask about that, I think as Will said, is it possible to, I don't really know what the, guidance is for how detailed a report has to be. If we're actually talking about, fully take the point of the cumulative burden, it's only so many hours in a day. And there's so many things you can focus on at a time. But I was just suggesting, or really just asking if it is feasible to just wind back how exactly detailed every report has to be, and perhaps asking for more information, with a specific report or whatever.
I think it's just something we should all be mindful of, and not asking for too long reports and checking ourselves on that. Lucy, do you want to sum up?
Yes. So just to say that all the recommendations have been accepted. We take on board there's a lot of work on the officers, and it will be very time consuming. We will amend recommendation 3. But I think just on your point, John, we did think about it, but I do think just given financial constraints and everything, I think it's just prudence and good management that we have these, and I promise we do scrutinise thoroughly. It will not be looked at.
Not be wasted. And I'd like to extend my personal thanks to Preeti for chairing the budget working group, and for all the other members on it, and for all the effort that officers put into, particularly Lisa and Liam, into making sure that we were fully briefed at all times, and you were incredibly helpful. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Here's what I have to say.
An afterthought.
It was. You just looked a little bit lost there, and I thought, really, I have to say something nice to us. Much though it goes against the grain. Wonderful. Thank you, everybody. We're going to move on to corporate reports. Corporate performance.
Assurance, regular reports.
So for this paper, if I can just, right, never mind.
Well, now we'll never know who you are.
What a good thing, because I don't know what I'm going to say. Just to remind everybody, this is a report that we've seen in at least one iteration before. So to some extent, this is possibly the final iteration before it's sort of set as to what we get to see every year. So there's that. So Joe and Holly are here to hear our observations and thoughts on that. We also, having looked at it beforehand, thought there were clearly some questions we were going to want to ask around fire risk assessment. So I think we also have an officer here who will come to the table with us in a minute to talk about that. And in the future, I think when we look at these reports in draft before the meeting, we need to identify, because we can't ask Dan Holly detailed questions about fire risk assessments, or we can, but they're not going to give us very sensible answers. So we need to look at the reports and identify if there are any particular areas. We either want officers to come to the meeting, or we want to, ask questions to be answered later. Just bearing that in mind, Joan, Holly, do you want to introduce this paper?
Yes, thanks, Councillor. We are very happy to. So just a reminder that this covers the period from April to September of last year, and apologies first that we aren't coming to the committee sooner with that information. I think Councillor Wheeler raised before the importance of bringing this in as timely a way as possible to the committee. It gives a kind of very high level view of progress and summarises both key performance indicators for the council and progress against actions identified in the council plan. It does seek to respond to some of the challenges we've heard from the committee in the past, particularly around length and focus. I think Councillor Pascal, you challenged us to produce 30-page version of this report. We haven't quite got there, 40 pages, but it's much closer than the 150 it was this time last year. I think you also encouraged us to make some stronger distinctions between the internal indicators and some of the external borough-wide place-based indicators. And I know since there have been conversations in the committee about the approach to data across the council as a whole. So we've tried to show a bit more clearly how these indicators and measures of progress are used internally within the council to drive changes and to make adaptations to approaches. And then just finally, I think it would be really helpful tonight both to get feedback on the kind of overall way we pitch the report, but also to identify specific issues that you may want select committees to investigate in more detail with the relevant officers who are kind of equipped to answer that expertise. And then finally, we continue to evolve the approach to performance reporting rightly. The paper sets out some considerations specifically in light of the Grenfell Tower inquiry's findings about how we might continue to do that. But we're also looking at other things like qualitative sources of information, which we could report more effectively. We're looking at doing a resident survey, which the council used to do to kind of monitor changes in resident sentiment, as well as some of the internal indicators suggested here. And alongside that, we've got the refresh of the council plan action plan. So under the umbrella of the broader council plan, we've got a commitment to refresh the action plan, delivery plan, if you like, which takes us from now to 2027.
Thank you. I'd like to kick off with questions. And then John.
Thank you very much. So yes, you've produced 40 pages. I think the font size has come down, Joe.
I can comment.
Let me move on to my substantive questions. I think page 74, I mean, obviously nice to see the list of things that are going well on page 74 and 75. And this is really a comment on the report, which you see. Some of them are more like outputs than outcomes. And there's an obvious one, communities that we paid out 120k in grants to support young people. Well, really, we need to have outcomes, not outputs. So it's not, I mean, you could have spent 190k and got nothing, or you could have spent 75k and got an amazing result from it. It's the result that we're interested in, not how much money we're spending. So we could just really focus down on outcomes. If we're going to praise ourselves, that would be appropriate. Fire risk assessment. So I'm sure we'll get to the experts at the table shortly. For the first time, when I read that, I thought this report's actually telling me something useful and something that we ought to be worrying about, which is it's flagged up something red that we really need to deep dive into. And I want the details, and we have the SME and the details presently. But then I was reading through the paper and it struck me that actually it's being massaged away. It isn't actually a problem because it's all about misleading statistics. And there isn't actually a problem with the risk assessment. So something flashing red, but then it's explained away in the paper as being a statistical anomaly. So I'm wondering if it is actually a problem or not. And if it isn't a problem, it's still flashing red and it's worrying. Maybe it's worrying me unnecessarily. But if I'm worrying unnecessarily about that, is one of the greens or ambers actually, should they be actually red, and I'm not being drawn, my attention isn't being drawn to them. But let's see what the fire risk officer has to say. A final thing, it's not in the published paper, but it refers to the ward profiles. Now I had a look at mine, and I didn't really recognise my ward. I think the first is 3-line introduction to the ward, which has these 3 factual mistakes in it. And then it privileges one ethnic group by describing a percentage of and it's not really a very significant ethnic group in terms of numbers in my ward. It doesn't mention any of the other ethnic groups, but it does miss, if we're talking demographics, this is the single most important feature of my wards. Which is probably got the highest proportion of European citizens in the country. Yet that isn't mentioned, but the very small proportion, I think, is Asian British, or I've forgotten exactly how it's described, but that proportion is mentioned, which may be important in some wards, but I guess important in all wards, but only in the context of all the ethnicities. So I think those ward profiles need some work, and they perhaps need some local knowledge provided to them by the ward councillors. So things that are described as being in wards in the ward profile, which are actually outside the boundaries, and in another ward perhaps could be corrected. So you can perhaps respond to those, Joe, and I'm sure we'll hear from the fire officer presently.
So do you think we should be recommending that the ward profiles are scrutinised by the board?
I mean, I'd be happy if somebody wants, if they're published, I think they probably ought to be accurate, and I'd be more than happy to contribute on my ward where I know a little bit about it. But I guess I don't know who else.
Within the firm parameters, because we don't. Yes.
Yeah. Great. Well, perhaps we can pick up Council Hammond outside into specific areas in the profile for your ward, but certainly
obviously there are 18 wards.
Yes.
So I can only help with one.
Yes, and certainly we would welcome in more councillors. I bet he could help with more than one.
Yes.
We're happy to write to all councillors on that. So thank you for that feedback and apologies for those errors. I'll obviously leave the experts to talk about the fire risk assessment. The only thing I would say is that obviously performance monitoring is a delicate business. I think what we want to show where indicators are not within the range we've expected, but sometimes for the reasons for that don't indicate an underlying problem. So we try to be guided wherever possible by the indicator and then seek to do a bit more by way of explanation. You will have seen some indicators that are red in here where we don't quite understand why that's the case. So, for example, the number of people killed and seriously injured on the roads has increased. We need to do a bit more work to understand what's happening there and how that compares to other trends elsewhere in London. So I hope we haven't tried to explain it away. We've just tried to explain why that indicator is as it is. On the first points about outcomes, I think that's really important. We have challenged colleagues, so we gather this data from colleagues across the council to be really specific, particularly about achievements, where they can not only demonstrate what's been done, but also what impact it's had. And so we're hoping to be able to build that into the reporting, so we can be more specific about what change essentially an intervention or the project has had.
And perhaps just to say on the record that the Environment Select Committee is considering road safety amongst other transport related things at the March meeting, so we will deep dive into that then. Probably why I didn't highlight it tonight, because I know we've got detail.
Thank you. Joanna? Sydney and Lucy.
Can I just turn to page 82? So at the ultimate first box, when we say that this is our decent home standard, so we want 89%, and then it shows in the right hand column 29%. When you then go to the text at the bottom of the page in 516, we then talk about the two figures are incorrect. They don't match. So I read that actually we had only hit 29%, and down below you're saying that actually 29% is the figure is non-decent. Whereas actually I read that I should say 71%. And I know that having sat on the housing committee last week, they do have a concern about the decent homes. What I don't know is whether it's 71% or 29%, but at the moment, these two don't tally. One says the exact opposite of the other. So if you could go away and look at that, please. Secondly, the page earlier, page 80, the bottom line of the second book, it's about contingency planning. And there are 12 standards, and we wish to achieve all standards, and yet we're only achieving 9 out of 12. I didn't see this particularly picked up as to why. And in fact, I kind of looked at that and going, shouldn't that be a red? What kicks it into being a red? Because if we want to achieve all and we're only achieving 3/4 of it, something's wrong for me when I read this. And then as an overall perspective, I found the yellow text really hard to read. And I don't know how you can overcome that, but I feel that the people who are, I appreciate I wear glasses, but perhaps you could look at whether in fact this is disably accessible, because I don't think it is. I have other questions, so I won't.
Carried away by formatting into clarity.
I get one. Pretty.
It is very pretty. Is that something is there something to respond to there?
So I might take the decent homes point. I think there isn't. It looks like there is a mistake in that table.
It's failed miserably. There's a seat here.
Yeah, great. Anyone who doesn't know me, Gemma Leonard, I'm Assistant Director of Property Services. So yeah, in terms of decent homes, that we have a big exercise that's going on at the moment in terms of validation of our data. So the information that's in here was a slice in time, which showed us that there's some issues with some of the data and how it's been captured. And some of the information that we're doing, we know the figures don't represent actually what's out there on the ground, particularly when we've been doing a lot of capital works and they might not have reflected it back into the data yet.
So is it 29% or 71%? Which are we not complying with, or are you saying that actually it's still a work in progress? Because I know you're doing surveys.
Still a work in progress. So we did we self-reported to the regulator on decent homes and our data accuracy in last August. I joined council in September, and since then we've been doing monthly updates to the regulator in terms of we quote, this is the data that's evidenced because we validated it as we go. So we've been very clear what we're now going to be reporting on is accurate. And it's evidence, but if necessary, go out and actually look what's happening on the ground. So we're doing that, and we're also doing some condition surveys. So in terms of those, in terms of September, I'll take that way and look at it because we're slicing it each month and doing those updates that we've got, and we can share the reports that we've been sharing with the regulator.
I think whatever happens, one of those figures has to change.
Yeah.
I think the figure in the, you're right, I think the figure in the table at the top should be 71%, because 89% refers to the target that we're trying to reach. 29% is the non-decent target rather than the decent, but I appreciate it.
89% is the target we said we'll be at in 2028. The target we have to get is 100%, because you're only compliant if you've got 100%.
Table. So that's great.
Thank you.
And then, sorry, the contingency planning, the 9 out of 12?
Yes. Is that a failure or not?
I will check that with colleagues. I'm not close enough to the detail on those standards and whether those standards have to be met over a period of time or at one moment in time. We'll check that and come back to you. And once we certainly have to look at the RAD rating.
What stage did it trigger a red?
Yes, yeah, and it needs to be referred to in the narrative as well, which is.
So Sydney, I saw next.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of quick questions. First one, will any of these metrics on page 66 be on the council website that's approved to residents? What if they are, or what stage may be put there? And then the second question was on the crime, page 80, 81. I noticed that the number of crimes, it's got a green arrow going down. It doesn't tell me relative to other London boroughs that crime has actually increased. So whether we could have crimes 1,000 or some other metric so that it takes out the different sides of the boroughs. It doesn't tell us whether crime is actually going the right way. It makes sense for us to have a track. So just visibility on the website.
Yeah, so just on the website point, there is a dashboard which is published on a quarterly basis, which has all of these indicators and all of the sort of performance indicators and all of the RAG ratings for the progress against the council plan actions. I think we've agreed with the Scrutiny team that every time that's published, it will be shared with all of you. So we bring committee data to the committee twice a year, but you will see that data quarterly. So if there are particular areas of concern or of interest, you're able to ask us to update on those as part of the next cycle of reporting. We are looking again at that dashboard to make it more accessible, more user friendly. It's always a challenge to kind of capture all of this information and then convey it in a way that is meaningful and accessible to residents, but it's one that we are still working on. And on crime, I might have to take that away. We can certainly both share the figure and consider whether we use a comparator for future reporting.
I think just worth adding, one of the things that is planned for that dashboard review on the website is including more benchmarking data so that we can sort of both look back in time but also look versus elsewhere.
Lucy, I saw Lucy, Toby,
mine is just on recycling rates, which is coming up as amber, and obviously the last one is 21.6. I was looking into this today. It's like we are in the top sort of lowest 5 boroughs in London in terms of recycling, and I didn't know that. And just understanding, I know you note here some of the things we're doing to try and change that, but I don't know, it feels like to consistently be amber, that to be sort of some of the lowest in London, let alone the London figures in comparison to the country are much worse. Just felt, I don't know, not necessarily that accurate, but maybe I'm being really blunt on that. But I just was really surprised to see that we weren't doing well on a London sort of. Sorry.
Perhaps watch the recording of the ESC from last quarter where this was discussed in some detail. But yes, it's a good, very interesting subject.
Well, it's basically to do with the type of housing in the borough.
Yeah, and I'm
know,
aware of that. Yeah. Because I don't look in this stuff often because it's not my committee and this is Greg's area. Just be really interested. Maybe I can speak to you about what we're doing.
Fair enough. Internal discussions. Toby.
Some most British pop in the wall, puts the bins out. A troubling number of dodges, but I will be speaking through them. So first question is recruitment issues. We have the warden for every ward, so this is page 81 under crime. Warden for every ward is operating well, but there are recruitment difficulties. So what's likely to happen there and when, or are we really just in sort of, should I just go through all of the questions? Okay. Second is around homelessness, page 87. Now, as I understand, so this particularly targeted approach to workflow and customer journey. Now, I think I'm probably generally on record saying we just need more staff, but and that's very simplistically stated. But now, am I to understand? There's not much detail here, but there are one thing I've spoken to with officers, is really about having departments, equivalent officers in different departments, just more joined up. So especially like family services and housing, like those two in particular, has been a really big issue, and has some really quite, difficult casework as a result, but they're not keen to communicate. So I hope Seek Assurance that that's part of that strategy, very explicitly. Third question is about food support payments. Well, generally the fair and Biden supports on page 89. I worry about how we're actually outreaching if we're not actually getting the food support payments out that we intend to. I highly doubt that's because there are fewer people who don't qualify for them. And if there are incomplete submissions, it suggests are we actually following that up? And where that is.
Well, I mean, in terms of ward and every ward, if there are recruitment difficulties, then we can keep on trying to recruit, or we can try and change the model.
Right.
I mean, it was a good aspiration. I think particularly in the light of trying to create a relationship between the community and the warden, and indeed the council and councillors for the ward and the warden. But if recruitment patterns are such, then we need to look at how we can deliver the service pragmatically. The second one was about joining up services. I suppose we all want to break down silos wherever we can, so I take that on board. In terms of food support payments, I think the paper does say that we're following up with applications that are incomplete. I know that the lift tracker is showing that there are fewer households that are struggling than were a year or two ago, but we should be still very concerned with supporting them wherever possible. So where there are incomplete applications, it's right that we should follow up.
I'm mindful of the time, sorry.
Can I just add my last one?
Be concise enough.
It's about, so it's on the next section, page 99 and 100. I just find it a little bit, perhaps sensitive to these things, sometimes how this table at the top of page 100, what that really translates to where the rubber meets the road, if I don't use that phrase, between key priorities and ongoing the council has described. And if we are in a kind of early stage of creating this framework, when is it going to be a little bit clearer to immediate that need?
Yeah, I can try and answer that. But also, I'm happy to hear feedback on it and adapt it. But just in terms of trying to explain it, I think if you look through the current council plan action plan, it's sort of a combination of project work, sort of specific deliverables, and some, I guess, of business that we also monitor through our performance monitoring. So it's trying to be a bit clearer about that and sort of pulling out some of the actions that actually relate to the ongoing work that we do as a council, and which we absolutely think is important and should monitor, but do through the performance indicators. They're sort of separating that out. And then trying to have a bit more of a distinction between some of the deliverables that are very specifically, and these are the right things to be in our council plan action plan, and to be reporting on, what do we want to achieve in the next 12 months for our residents, really tangible. We want to have a decision on Maxilla, for example, and then separating off the bit more the kind of how the council are run things, some of which are in here. So things like delivering on our people plan, I think, is in there as an action. So just being a bit clearer about that isn't an equivalent to delivering on Maxilla. So that's sort of what that table is supposed to say, but maybe it could be simpler.
Thank you. Proceed, and then Portia.
Okay, very quickly, I did actually, Joe, check out the corporate performance dashboard, and you say that it's in progress. So that explains a few things. I think the keys weren't quite clear, but as you say, it's in progress, so that's absolutely fine. Page 33, it says last line, there's a third party that has been commissioned to update the council's website, and the web team is now fully staffed and committed to the project. Don't think to be so mean, but our website is impossible to deal with. I mean, it's easier to go through Google. So I just wondered, who is this third party, and if you could give me some updates. Page 83. And what is the plan there? And then I just had the other one was page 94. We talked about the complaints answered on time. That's more for Fiona. I know from my own experience dealing with social housing they would definitely not agree with those figures. So I just wanted to know what the methodology that we use to derive these figures.
Well, for response times, we have a target for the time in which we want to reply to people. And if we reply to them in that time, then we've met the
Right, so it's only time of response, but not if the casework's been resolved. That's not the case. It's literally
Yes.
how quickly we respond.
Yeah, I mean a substantive response, but
So if I could just come in on this one, there was, so at full council last week, you had the annual complaints report, and that gives more detail. So of course it'll be a while before you have the next one here, but that gives more detail on the percentage of people who are happy with their complaints response, which isn't particularly high. I think it's at 29% in housing. But the compliance in terms of people getting their responses within the time frame, that's the figure that has substantially increased over the last couple of years. But it's not the same as people being content with or satisfied with the responses that they've had.
Just to add, Councillor, I think this is a good example of how you can kind of evolve performance reporting. So there was an issue with timeliness of responses, which is partly why it's in this track. But it may be that if that settles and is periodically above 80% or above 90%, which is the target, that we then move to another measure, which is more focused on satisfaction or escalation. But I think it was sufficiently concerning originally to keep an eye on as an indicator, because those responses were not sufficiently timely.
Right, so maybe we can have the one for delivery. Okay, well,
thank you for getting it nearer to 30 pages. That was a into the wind shot, so 40 pages is quite okay. Index would be good, so we could get some game across it. The question I wanted to ask was, is there anything, any thought about measuring how we measure long-term impacts of early interventions? Because this is something that relates both to FCS and to ASC. But also allied to that is, if we're looking at the relative importance of statutory requirements and non-statutory requirements, that we don't forget that some non-statutory interventions will support statutory demand and those are being reduced. End of.
Very quickly. On page 84, we talk about smokers completing a 4 weeks quit after using the NHS. They can stop smoking cigarettes. Why is that a council metric?
Public health.
And could we make that clearer as to why it's council metric?
Yes.
Who's going to respond to Will's points?
Yes, we can certainly. So this measures obviously activity within council plan commitments. There are specific commitments in the council plan about prevention and early intervention. So looking at both how we measure that activity and the impact of that activity should be a part of our approach to measuring performance. I think there's also a link to your question there about the kind of borough-wide place-based indicators, what we know about the changing demographics of the borough, what we know about kind of the changing population. And I think that's something that we also want to find a way, particularly perhaps through an annual report, to bring to this committee so that we can understand some of that changing demand and hopefully better understand the impact of some of our interventions at an earlier stage.
Very often interrelated. Yes, that's one of the key things we learned from Southport.
So do we also need to talk about fire safety? So shall we, who's going to pose the question on that?
Well, it's already posed it earlier, didn't I? Should we?
I missed it slightly, but I think as we have the officers here, we must take advantage of that.
So the question is, do we actually need to worry about this?
Not why not?
It looks like we do, and then it looks like it's been massaged away on page 81.
So should you be worried about it? Yes, we're worried about it. Is it under control? Yes. And then I'm going to hand over to Rob for the
do introduce yourselves.
Yeah, so I should ask again. We are worried. Sorry, my name is Raj Sajid. I'm the head of fire health and safety within Housing Management. And I've brought my colleague Orlando back actually, so we can look after our risk assessment.
And
So the story is why have we got worried?
Yeah.
Why should we be worried?
I mean,
What do you
the
think?
numbers are getting higher, but as Fiona said, we are managing it, and there are various factors of the numbers going up. One of them is we had a backlog of batches. So for our fire risk assessment, we use the Home Office prioritization tool depending on risk. So we have some properties we do every 2 years, the FRA, the fire risk assessment, and some properties every 3 years. So we've been doing the 2 years, 2 years, 2 years, and 3 years. And last year, a high number of FRAs were due at the same time. For that reason, we see the number went up quite highly. One of the other factors that we are looking closely is the 1A. So there's different categories of actions when come out of the fire risk assessment, and that's determined by the assessor. We don't have any control on that when they classify an action as 1A, 1B, or 1C. But we have had quite disagreement with the way the actions are being classified. And I'll give you a quick example. For example, if there's a missing fire, no smoking sign, and they have classified it as a 1A, which is very high risk and needs to be done immediately. But for that kind of reason, we have an independent external verifier that's looking at our FRA assessors. And already they've assessed 2 of their fire risk assessment, and they've come up with the same conclusion as us, as a lot of these actions are being classified. Orlando.
Yeah, so you can see that there's a lot of high risk actions in there because of the large amount that Raj mentioned before, the backlog that's built them up to a quite high number. When I've spoken to the actual assessors themselves, I've had to, on an individual basis, go over pretty much all of the ones which I disagreed with. And that's because, for example, my past was working for the London Fire Brigade, who actually enforce these actions. So, like Raj said, giving someone a 1A for having a no smoking sign, you're never going to enforce someone that is in court. They will stand up. Whereas if you had a mobility scooter in the communal area where a potential fire and ignition source, now that can be something which should be a 1A. I'd probably say about 80% of these here aren't correct. And now we're getting them third-party accredited checked by Osborne, which is a different risk assessor. Is coming up with the same conclusion that I already did. Good thing out of it is, from all the work I've had with our current provider, that they are now seeing it from our point of view, and they're a lot more hesitant to be giving 1As unless, because they know I'm going to go back to them in about 10 seconds and tell them this is incorrect. And now we're starting to see more level fire risk assessments coming through with the right actions on them as well. Yeah, classified correctly.
Can I just add to one of the things? When they come in, we've got a really highly qualified, highly skilled team, so they can make that judgment call. One of the things we don't do is we don't mark our own homework. We look at it and go, well, no, that's not quite right, but we won't mark it, we won't change it ourselves because of our background. So in bringing in the external consultant, we had to wait for them to get accreditation to come to the level they could do it. And I don't think they're still as qualified as our team. So we have a really strong team because we care and because we are concerned about it. So yeah, it's been controlled. We are starting to see the shift. We're now seeing the parties understanding better what they should be flagging concerns are, and the numbers will shift. Equally, because we had this bulk number of actions being logged at the same time, it's taken a lot of resource that we've allocated to it to start driving it down and making sure not just playing the statistics, because that doesn't do anything, actually properly managing the risk, making sure we mitigate if there are any risks, and also making sure we're driving the action and closing down the actions that we know are valid. So there's a lot of people actually doing all the actions and closing them out.
So how much extra resource did you put in to start reducing the backlog?
I have to take that one all away in terms of how we've done that, because it's across all the teams. So there's extra sort of resource within the capital delivery team looking at it. Generally, it's not additional people. It's people who've diverted and prioritised this action over other things. So we can try and quantify that if that's helpful.
Joanna, can I understand, is this a lack of training by the fire assessor, or are they overly cautious because we're the Grenfell Council, and as a result everything that's borderline gets an A1? I mean, what, and also how do we avoid this going forward in terms of making sure that we get the right and fair assessment?
I can comment on that. So in our contract with the assessor, we made it very clear of the level of education that we want from them before they could start doing fire risk assessments for us. Every single company is going to have a massive turnover because the industry is so in demand. And what you find is sometimes people with less qualifications will start doing them, and we actually ask them to go back and redo them. But for a while, before I'd say Gerald, who's our new operations manager, came into post, there would be some FRAs that would go through and we wouldn't notice that someone maybe less qualified had done it. Now, that's one reason. So you're right, that lack of education on some of these assessors because they're not up to standard yet. But also, I think there might be some, like, I think if you look at the next table, you can kind of see tolerable and moderate fire risk assessments. I would notice that any new risk assessor that came into our BKC, and I've looked at 3 different assessors now, they would give you a moderate no matter what, or higher just because you're RBKC. When I would look at the fire risk assessment, and I would probably see it as a tolerable risk. And I don't think their perception is looking at the right way. And when you have a conversation with them about it, and don't forget, we get so many in at one time on top of loads of other work we do. It's hard to have those conversations about every single risk assessment that comes in. I try my best to do so now, but you can see I've reviewed every single risk assessment we've had come in over the last 5 years, and there's a problem with nearly all of them because it's still accountable for human error, but also differences in opinion with risk. So a firefighter, which I wasn't before, would have a completely different perception of risk to me, who's looked at the more theory side of it, because they might notice that one small gap in a wall might let in X amount of smoke, whereas I've not seen that first sight in a fire. And everyone's risk perception, whereas most of the people do risk assessments and then used to be a firefighter, for example, so they might not have that sort of risk perception.
Thank you, Sydney.
Sorry, and then I would like to add to that. So I think, yeah, it definitely stems, a lot of it stems from us being the Grateful Borough. But I've come from a similar position in the Hackney Council, and we weren't getting the same sort of high risk or the same sort of risk assessments that we're carried out. But as Orlando said, they have put a lot of efforts in terms of working with the contractor, in terms of doing more quality assurance around the risk assessments before they're assigning us actions. And I'll say similar in terms of the building safety regulator. They were asking much more questions of us than in my previous role in Hackney, where I think it's just the nature of the borough.
Thank you, Sydney.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question on fire doors. This is talking about risk assessments. We've talked about fire doors before. Is it worth having KPI on fire doors as well as on risk assessment? I think you talked about it in the housing subcommittee.
Thank you. Good suggestion. Portia, do you have a question?
Yes, I do. Thanks, Chair. On page 74, I can see that adult and social care, they've launched a way for well-being for people that are facing mental health. Now, because this is an online platform, like a directory, I mean, how is it promoted to the most vulnerable? I would imagine, because most people, they don't have computers. So how will you get that out there to the most vulnerable to promote the directory? Are there any steps that have been taken to do so far? And page 92, I mean, providing training and support to those who need it, that places. There's some people, I mean, why is that in red? Can I have some explanation? That's my question.
Sorry, is that page 92?
Yes.
Which was the review?
So 3.25. Thank you.
You might go back to Bernie for that.
Yes, so on the way to wellbeing, I'll certainly talk to public health colleagues and get a response to you. My understanding was that the online hub was a first step, but it was part of a wider plan to communicate that support to people who needed it most. So we'll find out what's being done to do that. And then providing training and support to those who need it in ways and places that make sense to people. Was your question about why that was
why is it in red?
So at the moment in Q2 it's in amber, but it was in red because do you want to,
Yeah, I think this is one of those that's probably an example of why a refresh of the action plan is probably a good thing, because it's, you know, obviously a very important action, but the action is really vague and not really tangible, and this is exactly what we're going to do on it. And our unemployment levels in the borough are still pretty high, which is why it has been very consistently. It has recently sort of gone down to amber to reflect that there is an employment skills review going on at the moment that's really looking at having a more direct delivery model for supporting people into employment. There's a real focus in the Fairer Action Plan on it. So there are some sort of real tangible plans to improve that, but that's why it's sort of stayed consistently red.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you. I wonder if the sponsors on the fire risk assessments perhaps need to go back to the scrutiny this select committee, or some of them, or maybe something to discuss with Claire. John, I'm looking at you as vice chair.
I think this did come up, but I don't think it came up in this much detail. And actually, I think I learned more today than I did in housing.
I just always think that when you're discussing remarking things, and it possibly just deserves a little bit of extra, if not in the scrutiny committee, then maybe some exploration outside it to satisfy us.
And I know the audit committee is also interested. I think we can pick it up through both.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much, and thank you very much for having such full responses.
So we're not asking them to be marked there, so.
Okay, I think we've completed that paper. Thank you very much, everybody. And we will move on to our own, examining our own labels now. Isn't there? And look at the forward plan, it's the first page of the forward plan. Decision. I'm going to call through as usual. Starting at one, starting at page 1.
Yes, page 1.
Yeah.
Strikes me council asset strategy. I mean, I don't really know what's exactly in it, but it looks like sort of thing.
Yes, that looks possibly interesting.
And that's going to the next leadership team meeting next week. I don't know if Lisa on the way out.
Lisa, on your way out, what's the council asset strategy? That looked interesting. Is it?
So that's coming in the property team.
Yes.
Look out which way the council can use its assets.
Would have been nice if it come to this committee.
It's not my.
No, absolutely, completely get that.
I can circulate.
That's a very good spot, Rose.
The paper's going to be published on Tuesday.
So I can see it again, it's not yours now. Thank you. That's okay.
Maybe
Thank you for
just
stepping
maybe
into the group.
scrutinised afterwards, or I mean, that's
As
the wrong
much
way
they
around.
were lived to do as that all, yes. Yeah.
So you want to put on the work programme?
Oh, that sounds interesting. I mean, it's not the committee as a whole.
Yeah.
My
Yeah.
suggestion.
So not certainly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just want to know. I know sometimes we call things over and people ask for things. Is there a way of putting a little comment in just some initials? I has already asked for something, and just add another column, because otherwise we sit here and we go through it again, as opposed to you asked for it last meeting.
Is that feasible? That's supposed to be what's in the final column.
Yes, it is, yeah.
But if something's silent, so that's just sitting there because nobody wants it. That was,
Or nobody
has
has
no
done
comment.
it. Yeah. Page 2. 3, so yeah, on 3 you can see it's noted that it's going to be looking at 4. 5.
5. I mean, presumably we don't get the 44 out. As a matter of course, in this committee, it doesn't actually say it's going to scrutinise. We do get particularly the 44 is interesting.
You get all of the reports. The reason there's not a date in is that this committee's meetings are only agreed up to the AGM. So you'll definitely get that.
6.
So they agreed to extend the provision for to mental health supported accommodation. Has that been actioned?
Then push which page is that?
Page 6. And also for the sexual health.
That's
So-
very old. Will you,
Yeah.
Jackie will query that one.
So both, because there's a high, so we are aware of the position we are for the sexual health provisions. And also for the mental health provisions as well.
I was just going to add to the gun services. We did scrutinise it last year, and I've got no notes on it next, but it's tonight. It's worth adding to it.
7, 8, 9.
Can I raise Mansfield School? I presume you could come to.
So which page?
Page 9.
Yep.
Mansfield School belong.
Oh, yeah,
And over the page. Presumably that would come to FCS, would it?
It's been withdrawn in favour of an alternative.
So I'll make a note that you want that, if that's what you want, you'd like to refer it to.
But if that specific KD's been withdrawn, there's
But it's still
still
withdrawn,
the
isn't
issue, isn't it?
It says a new key decision will be raised.
Yeah.
So you'd like to
the new
one.
one.
So when the new one, you can
that's the
do
trick,
that,
yeah.
yeah, perfect, yeah.
Good. 10, 11, 12, 13.
Right, has Claire given you repairs? Has Claire given you any? No, okay. So, I think the PD on repairs policy.
Which one's that?
Page 13.
Sorry, page 13, penultimate.
This one. Yeah.
My name's
Yes.
Okay. 14. 15, 16.
15.
15.
Decants policy.
Which one?
The penultimate decants policy.
Decants policy.
Yeah.
Okay, Toby, was that the one you wanted to do?
No, I was just transfer the final one, transfer of funds to council ownership KD. Papers published decision was due to be made on or after the 25th of November. What's happening?
So we've had some extra information on that. Is that right?
Yeah, there is in the last column, so papers were published. There's something on here.
Yeah, it just ends with there was a decision due in November.
Sorry, I got some additional information today and I'm just trying to match up. It's almost due for decision, but apparently Secretary of State consent is needed to transfer the homes into the general fund. So that's the stage that it's at.
Is there a time?
No, it says it's almost ready. I don't know the date for it.
16, 17.
So 16 again, in the penultimate antisocial behaviour, and then on 17 the rent income. That's easy.
18, 19,
new Devon Roll policy and do repairs recharge. Let's just be prepared for the consultation.
21. 22.
22, again, there's an alpha, the succession policy.
Mary, if we just go back very rapidly, 20, the disrepair policy, bearing in mind the the KPI issue we had, but we need to make, officers need to make sure that those actually relate to each other consistently, the stats in one and the policy in the other. But page 20, second one down, new management disrepair policy.
Yes. Okay.
And it's not specifically to bring that one in, it's just to make sure it's consistent with that other just.
I presume on 22, probably the vacant rental or hire properties.
I think you discussed that at a previous meeting, and Maxine might have had some information on the activities we did, yeah.
I think the explanation on it is very clear. Yes, it is.
Yeah. 23. 24.
Yeah, procurement strategy, the final one, 24.
Sorry, what was that, Toby?
Yeah, the final one and the 24 procurement strategy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's it.
Okay. 25. 26. 27.
Yeah, like I said, the 5-year grant agreement, for Carnival Village Trust. Yeah, And that's another one where the due date was being gone. So they didn't have information.
So the clutter knows.
But there has an email has come out about that, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Already, yeah.
The ESC is going to, there's got a question on Carnival that's coming to the June meeting next year. I don't know if this can be incorporated within that, but we gave them an action and they're reporting then.
Okay, good.
Okay.
Actually.
That's 27, 28, 29, 30, 31.
31, the bottom one, the design SPD on designing up crime. That looks quite interesting. Coming across, well, it's committee for crime, my committee for planning and housing. So, it's presumed it is related to housing. So,
yep. Well,
So are you saying you'd like to look at that in environment? It's cross-cutting.
it sounds, it could be cross-cutting, but it could also be environment. I don't, because I don't really know what's in it.
Yeah.
I don't know where
So we'll
it's-
get some more information and then we'll decide where
And then
it is.
decide where it sits.
Yeah.
So 32, 33.
Question on 33. Very interesting government more Bristol, but it's extraordinary. That was all done, dusted and decided, and why hasn't it been implemented? 20, 30, 33.
The easement.
Yeah, the easement thing. It's a small point, but why is it hanging around?
Jackie will find out. 34, 35, and nothing on 36. So okay, and then we come to our program. The rest of the year laid out in front of us.
I did have some
Yep.
program that we discussed at the prelude. So the North West London NHS has written to various stakeholders about the North Kensington Recovery Programme 2025 to 29, developing a community-led recovery. They've been doing some consultation, some resident consultation, asking people to complete surveys, etc. This committee has it on its work programme for the NHS to come back with a Grenfell report, and it was not allocated a date because you're waiting for the right time. So it's whether he was likely to find out if the NHS could come to the meeting on the 13th of May, because that would seem to fit with
That sounds
what they're
sensible.
doing.
Everyone's happy.
Chair, just to comment on that, I went to one of the engagement session in Avondale School. I don't think that was proper engagement, considering there were 5 ward councillors and maybe
I'm
4
going to trust you to
local
make that
residents.
point very clearly to them when they come.
Yes, and also the questionnaire, read the questionnaire. It's not fit for purpose for highly qualified, individuals in such high positions. You'd have thought that they'll come up. Even my son could do a better questionnaire like that. First of all, they ask to page 9 about your ethnicity, whatever. You do that at the back of a questionnaire. How are they going to provide any form of tangible data, and measure any form of, delivery service, what we've been going through. So I think it's unacceptable. And I think they should go back and do the questionnaire. It's not acceptable.
Thank you. Okay, so I think that's a good topic to have on the 13th of May. Tony?
Just very quickly, I understand there's going to be flooding related reports hopefully coming to environment in a few. But I haven't checked.
Next municipal year, it's a candidate, but it's just because we didn't do it this year, I suspect we would probably want to do it next year.
Okay, yeah, I'm just seeing in the next few months there are going to be some very
Okay, I think it's just.
The points under 5.2 presumably will be carried over to the next time we discuss this.
Yes, so
NHS
savings and transformation links with the budget working group recommendation.
Yep.
Notting Dale Heat Work will liaise with colleagues. KPIs, Mary and I had a meeting with the director of resources, and we're still waiting for those. Grenfell we've just discussed, and digital data and technology. I think we're going to the next year.
Okay.
Because you need to for March.
Yep.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Any else, any other business? I think what Chelsea said. Let's do Yeah.